Will live. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Saturday Preschool for Philosophy and Black Liberation. Today is April 26th, and today we're going to discuss mainly about upcoming symposium on May 10th and 11th, which is titled Seizing the Future, the Revolutionary Music of Ellington, Mingus, Ra and Bootsy. And so, to begin the discussion, I'll turn it over to the.
Thanks a lot, man. I'll just, I'm going to read the vision statement, but after I kind of tell you all about what we have been doing in our planning and such. First of all, this will be, not for us, but for the city of Philadelphia, an unusual event because it will take music seriously and view it as a revolutionary force, and to establish a standard which says to musicians and audiences, if this is only about entertaining you, you are doing a disservice to the music you're playing to love. So we want to establish a criteria of judgment, of knowledge, of deployment, of application, of what is perhaps the greatest musical achievement, at least in this new period of modernity, if not modernity itself. As you know, the four musicians that we will examine, and my worthy colleagues will flesh that out as we go along. Duke Ellington, Charlie Mingus, Ra and Bootsy Collins. Now, I guess out of the gate, we have to say, hello, brother. That's not good to see you. No. Sit. It's our evaluation that the most advanced music of this period has been abandoned by the very people who claim to love it. If one looks at the achievement of this music, and we're talking about that movement that comes in the wake of this new movement of world thought that we have been exploring, that is initiated by Du Bois, which thereby says that the modern world must go to a new level. And this music is part of that. It is, and we're not going to, I don't guess we'll go through every aspect of what we're going to do because we haven't fully worked it out ourselves. We're still working on it. But just as far as we have gone thus far, it is a magnificent achievement. And I was saying to Michelle, who's often anxious when things get close to the day that they'll take place, I said, well, let's keep it 100. We won't expect a large turnout for many reasons. One, because this is not a hip hop conference. This is not we don't see the trajectory culminating in hip hop, no matter how you go, whether you go through funk or whether you go through the sorrow songs or blues. In fact, as it looks now, hip hop is not even a part of the discussion. I would say my judgment is it constitutes a strategic intervention into the spiritual life of Black people by the ruling class to undermine the consciousness of Black folk and especially of the youth. I don't think we should hesitate in making that judgment and saying it out loud, no matter who it offends. So from that standpoint, we're not seeking popularity, but we're seeking to be principled and to advance something that will also be manifested in the knowledge conference and will set the groundwork for the way that we will argue for this music as a part of the struggle for freedom. One of the things that is apparent, and I'll say this, I hope none of the people that we've interviewed thus far will take offense, but in every instance, they have forgotten what this music is about because they have forgotten that it is connected to freedom. That it is, that freedom is the foundational aspect of all of this. In our interviews, it's like pulling teeth to even get that on the table for discussion. So we're doing something unique and special. And so it will be those who proceed in their lives in good faith, who are not opportunists and who have not already sold out for whatever reasons. And that's very important for us. And it's not new for us to situate ourselves against the whole postmodern framing of things. We're not trying to queer Ellington or Sun Ra. That's not our game. In fact, we must, I think, always say that queer theory is a counter-revolutionary movement that has nothing to do with homosexuality or sexuality at all, but redefining in theoretical terms of society that would take the struggle for revolutionary and progressive and democratic change back decades, from which we would find it difficult, the people, I should say, would find it difficult to recover from. The youth would be decimated, as they almost are, by it. So we're not doing that. In fact, we're going back to experiences and art in the intellectual life world of the Black proletariat to understand why that is not what the people are. In fact, I should say that so much of what is considered music, which is commercial corporate propaganda,
Right.
in terms of young people, is cognitive manipulation. I would even go further and say cognitive, cultural, and moral manipulation.
Yes.
Having said that, this is a time for deep reflection. Every person, every young person has to understand that she or he must take responsibility in this time. If you are passive and are satisfied with being morally manipulated and cognitive manipulated, but that's on you. And I would say from our standpoint, we don't have to go down that road. We don't have to make that compromise. And And so much of what goes on, I don't care whether it's academic, whether it's cultural, whether it's musicological, so much is predicated upon unprincipled compromises and such. So the other thing, did I say this already? For my part, I don't expect musicians, jazz musicians, to show up for this. You know, they proceed as though they know it all. They proceed that because they can play the piano, that they understand the music. Right. And its purpose. I expect some young people, I expect some people who turn up for jazz concerts to come. But only those who see the need or the necessity and inevitability to proceed from the basis of a high moral standard, and thus to be prepared to reflect and to investigate where do we go from here and how do we deploy this great civilizational achievement that we call Black music. Is that fair to say? You know, and you know, we've been, as we've worked on this, we spend a lot of hours and we're going to spend a lot more hours. We had to dig deep. We had to listen to the music. We had to listen to the composers and musicians themselves talk about what they were doing. We had to read biographies, like Emily was telling me this morning about Mingus's biography, but there are others. There's Duke Ellington. There are the multiple interviews and biographical statements of Sun Ra and others. And so there is a lot that we're trying to pull together. And as we prepare for this symposium, we are learning. And so in a lot of ways, for us, it is a beginning. Yeah. But it's a big beginning for everybody. So much has been lost. So much has been lost and abandoned. And I think that this loss, this abandonment, is a moral question. You know, it is a moral abandonment. It is, let me put it this way, it is the punkification of musicians who once stood for something, and of a tradition that comes out of the most rigorous and hardcore fight. And that's what it was. And anyone, young or old, who thinks that some commercialized, corporatized, Zionist control, let's keep it 100, music can be a substitute for the freedom sounds that were produced over these centuries by African Americans. So having said that, I hope I didn't speak too harshly, and I'm not negative at all. I don't have a negative outlook, but I approached this and it occurred to me that the music might be one of the most intense sites of the ideological and political struggle. And if Black people are to experience a renaissance of culture and political struggle, we must reclaim the great music that has been produced. We must reclaim it. We must identify it. We must say what it was and what the achievement was and what the genius was. And any fake equivalency of whoever, 50 Cent or Snoop Dogg, or Lil Wayne.
Any of them.
Yeah, or the whole project with Mingus or Sun Ra, any of that, or even Bootsy. Let's keep it 100 there. Any false equivalency is to the detriment of the great geniuses that produced the great music and to the people that they were speaking to. But I want to read, and I think, by the way, I've been working. I know I said I'm your humble and obedient servants, but y'all done turned me into a slave.
I ain't turning you into none.
I mean, I'm working day and night these days. But I finally, early this morning, completed a draft of the mission statement, which I'd like to read. And I just beg your that you be kind and understanding. I have not yet, worked out all the phrases and all the nuances of language, which I'm still trying to get to. Okay, seizing our future, the revolutionary music of Ellington, Mingus, Sun Ra, and Bootsy Collins, our vision. Quote, the mystic spell of Africa is and ever was over all America. It has guided her hardest work, inspired her finest literature, and sung her sweetest songs. Her greatest destiny, unsensed and despised though it be, is to give back to the first of continents the gifts which Africa of old gave to America's fathers' fathers, W.E.B. Du Bois. The people must prove to the people a better day is coming, Curtis Mayfield. Arising from the ancient African village, the transatlantic slave trade, plantation slavery, civil war, Black Reconstruction, the Black church and revolution, Black music is at once the music of Black freedom and of humanity's quest for freedom and democracy. It is everything African, everything modern and futuristic. It joins the rhythms, melodies, and work songs of Africa with the folk and classical music of the world's cultures. In the end, it is everything African, everything human, and thus all humanity in its scope and essence. It is a companion to the new movement of world thought initiated by W.E.B. Du Bois at the start of the 20th century. It is a new music for the epoch of the rise of Afro-Asia. It is evidence of the complex yet ever-striving history of Black folk and their consciousness. During enslavement, it merged Africa's art, poetry, music to Black America's struggle for freedom, producing sorrow songs, a rhythmic narrative of a disappointed people, which defined this people in this strange land. This new people, in spite of everything, created music, art, poetry, and an unbending spiritual striving to be free. With the end of slavery, a new form of Black music, the blues, was invented. The blues expressed the consciousness of Black folk in the throes of the chaos and uncertainty after slavery and the defeat of Reconstruction. The sorrow songs and blues are the folk music of Black America. They contain unique rhythms, cadences, and melodies, alongside hitherto unknown chord structures that for the white world were exotic, mysterious, and even threatening. They were sad, expressing tragedy in ways unknown to European classical and folk music. There was on occasion glimpses of joy, satire, and playfulness. But what defined this folk music was an unyielding desire to be free in opposition to oppressors and slave owners. This is the oldest American music and the foundation upon which all American music stands. It is the ground of the American artistic, musical, and spiritual life worlds. If an American people is to be created out of the chaos of the current crisis, it will be due in large measure to the art and music of Black striving. With the 20th century, new forms of the synthesis of the sorrow songs and the blues occurred, energized by the incorporation of new instruments in large and small group configurations. New chords, melodies, lyrics, and rhythms produced a thoroughly modern music. This started a new world movement of music. It would lay the foundation, although hardly recognized at the time, for a new civilization. As such, a new music for humanity was Black folks' extraordinary gift. These Black composers and musicians, while dismissed, trivialized, and mocked, courageously embraced the purpose of their music and marched forward. Their advance guard, in spite of everything, began to glimpse the revolutionary and futuristic possibilities of what they were doing. Discriminated against, lynched, jailed, forced to compose and perform in the most humiliating conditions. They took instruments cast aside by most white musicians and reinvented them to produce new sounds. They reinvented old European instruments, played them in unusual ways, creating different sounds expressive of their interior lives and their people's history. In historic and unprecedented imaginative leaps, they went from Black folk music to a music that rivaled the European classical repertoires. This was an achievement of collective genius, showing virtuosic expressiveness. They spoke to the collective suffering as well as the person and interior lives of people only generations from slavery. In a world where white supremacy dehumanized Black folk, these composers and musicians showed their humanity in all of its complexity. This new 20th century music reflected a new level of Black people's consciousness. The composers and musicians represented a new type of revolutionary and freedom fighter. Their music was a new revolutionary declaration. It became a movement for revolutionaries, intellectuals, and freedom fighters. In the early 20th century, the musicians and composers evidenced unusual virtuosity and artistic discipline. This music began to show a collective virtuosity, especially as they taught themselves the possibility of European instruments. They engaged the European classical and folk repertoires, in fact, reinventing orchestral and small group formats first developed in Europe. They were insatiable in their search to know the possibilities of music. Their sacrifice for the purpose of art and freedom was in many ways unimaginable. Their courage in the face of mocking and oppression had perhaps never been seen. The volume and varied types of what they created exceeded. Shit. I'm sorry, forgive me. Oh shit. I'm sorry. I Clinical did something wrong. Exceeded what their white peers in Europe and the United States had produced. These were unschooled geniuses, autodidacts. propelled by a desire to impart to their sisters and brothers dignity and freedom, and to show to the world what Black genius looked like. Seldom have musicians and composers occupied a place as in the revolutionary vanguard of their people, as was the case with these musicians. While unacknowledged by the white American music world, these artists were sought out in Europe, Asia, and South America. Musicians such as Louis Armstrong, Buddy Bolden, Sidney Bechet, and others found receptive and encouraging audiences outside the U.S. Large groups and small ensemble formats were experimented with. Groups of 5 and 7, a type of small big band, were the earliest arrangements. The earliest forms of improvisation were primarily collective improvisation. Often the larger orchestras grew out of marching bands. The large orchestras appear mainly in the 1920s, led by Fletcher Henderson and Duke Ellington. The music began to take on greater structure, characteristic of symphonic orchestras or chamber ensembles. The music increasingly was composed for concerts and audiences that sought out concert venue or nightclubs. Henderson and Ellington were the vanguard of a new experimental and revolutionary music that fit the tastes and aspirations of young and militant Black audiences. The Black talented tenth rushed to embrace this new music. It was extolled by poets, writers, intellectuals, and revolutionaries. Many were fascinated by some even becoming supporters of the Russian Revolution. They started to view Black people as a nation within a nation. In spite of the changes in the music instrument and size of the orchestras, freedom and the exploration of Black life would remain their purpose. At the same time, this new music explored the spiritual lives of ordinary Black folk. Y'all have to excuse me. It's okay. At the same time, this new music explored the spiritual lives of ordinary Black folk. In spite of the racist characterization of Black people, this music, alongside poetry, asserted that Black people in all their varied physical types and colors, sizes, class backgrounds, and social locations were beautiful and were a people of dignity who should be respected. The musicians and composers heard the music and words of Bessie Smith and Gertrude Ma Rainey. They could hear through them the language and ways of speaking, aspirations and problems of everyday life of ordinary Black people in a racist society where most Black people were poor and occupied the lowest rung on the economic ladder. But then the musicians, most of whom grew up in the South, knew the agonies and disappointments as well as the joy of most Black people. Their improvisations presented the chance to express feelings that they could not otherwise express. At the start of the 20th century, Du Bois, in declaring the problem of the modern world as being the color line and race, was in effect establishing the foundation for a new movement of world thought. Black music of the 20th century was the musical equivalent of this new world movement of thought. Like Du Bois, the composers and musicians looked back to the Civil War and Reconstruction and understood what the significance of the emancipation of 4 million enslaved workers meant. But a counter-revolution against their emancipation occurred also. Being children and grandchildren of slaves and having grown up under severe Jim Crow segregation and terror, the counter-revolution against their people's freedom was a personal matter. Many of them were aware of the competing political platforms of Du Bois, Booker T. Washington, and Marcus Garvey, and the various ideologies from socialism and communism to liberalism and Black capitalism. All of this infused their music with a politics not seen on this level in American music. In the wake of World War I and the Russian Revolution, they began to see the defeat of Reconstruction through new and radical lenses. The sole answer they felt to racial oppression was complete freedom. They saw in Pan-Africa and Pan-Asia allied movements to their own. Their imagination quickly took on a Pan-African and Pan-Asian sensibility. After slavery, minstrelsy was a desired form of Black performance for white audience. By participating in this degrading entertainment, many artists sought acceptance from white audience and money, raising the question, what is Black music? The advance guard of Black musicians and composers increasingly saw Black music as that music that stood up for Black people. Anything else was entertainment for white folk seeking confirmation of their racist views. Hence, music must serve the people, dignify them, and raise their consciousness. In the end, this must inevitably emerge from a new consciousness and a new imagination, a Black proletariat imagination. The Black proletariat imaginary grounded the new music in three ways. Love, two, a moral and revolutionary imperative, and three, freedom. After World War II, new experiments took place. Such artists and composers as Charlie Parker, Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Max Roach, and Dizzy Gillespie challenged previous norms while deepening the commitment of the movement of the music to the movement for radical change to bring about freedom for Black people. They were in the forefront of supporting Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and the Civil Rights Movement. In the last half of the 20th century, as the Civil Rights Movement exploded in the nation and as a new Black arts movement captured the consciousness of Black folk, new musical movements appeared. In jazz, such artists as Ornette Coleman, John Coltrane, Cecil Taylor, Charlie Mingus, Archie Shepp, Albert Island, Miles Davis created new fusions of earlier forms of jazz while advancing new musical experiments, incorporating new political and ideological dimensions to their music. The Asiatic commitments were deepened. Support for world revolution and African and Asian independence movement broadened, as did exploring and embracing non-Western religious and philosophical practices, such as Islam, African spiritual and cosmological systems, Buddhism and Hinduism. Some openly embraced communism, the writings of Mao Zedong, and the Chinese and Cuban revolutions. Many rushed to support the Black Panther Party, Angela Davis, the Attica prisoners, and George Jackson. At the same time, in rhythm and blues, a romantic ideal appeared, exploring the special forms of Black romantic love, Black erotic sensibilities, and an embrace of the physical and spiritual beauty of Black men and women. These composers and musicians like Curtis Mayfield, Marvin Gaye, Nina Simone, Aretha Franklin, Donny Hathaway composed music and lyrics that address poverty, war and peace, civil rights, and the special possibilities of people loving one another in a white supremacist society.
Right.
Deploying this worldview and in organizing this symposium, the Saturday Free School for Philosophy and Black Liberation will examine compositional and performative legacies of Duke Ellington, Charles Mingus, son Ra and Bootsy Collins, as a way to investigate the democratic and revolutionary possibilities and essence of their work and its meaning for this time. Using videos of live performance and recordings of their most important work and through discussion, we will ask the question, is this music still relevant? Can it be reclaimed for this time of crisis? And if so, what must be done to achieve this?
Yeah, I think we've come really far with what we've kind of worked out for the music symposium the last few months. And well, I think the vision statement is really good, Dot. And I think it's really important that you wrote it and that it's basically so comprehensive in outlining why the music symposium at this moment. But I guess I could say a few things. Like one, sorry, I'm a little emotional from your statement actually, but I think it's a very important move that we as free school are making to situate this music back where it belongs. And I think what you're saying in your statement, which is very important, is that by looking at the evidence of the music itself and treating it with intellectual seriousness, we arrive at the conclusion that something has been lost or something has been stripped from the spiritual life world of the American people, but especially Black people, in terms of like a tradition having been destroyed. And I think like hearing your remarks, what it clarifies is that we have a role to resituate this music as revolutionary music, because like it's a little bit hard for me to get the language yet, but like I think basically that's the most pure way to describe the substance of this music. And if you describe it as such, then there's no separation between the consciousness of any human being and this music, which is to say that the evidence of this music is the evidence of a moral responsibility to reach that same height of human consciousness that was already being articulated by these musicians 100 years ago. And I think for me, the question that I keep asking is the significance of looking at music in particular. Why music? And something that we were talking about when we were planning last night is that it's very special in the history of the modern world. And this may be the highest example in the history of the modern world, where it was artists and musicians who were at the revolutionary vanguard of the makings of a new civilization. And I think that that is something that we are basically very indebted to, or is our task to uncover the full scope of, or the full dimension of, as Free School for the American Revolutionary process. Because, for example, the European geniuses, or whatever, great artists of the European Renaissance, let's say like Michelangelo, whatever, the Sistine Chapel, or Da Vinci. I don't know the European Renaissance that well, but I don't think there's anything comparable to what we're describing with the Renaissance that's happening at the start of the 20th century, after emancipation, after the unfulfilled promise of Reconstruction, where, and this is something that I think you really highlight in your vision statement, the collective virtuosity that emerges from the Black proletariat who flip into becoming the vanguard very, very quickly of furnishing an alternate worldview that is not just to be taken up by America, but becomes the worldview of the entire world like basically prophesizing, or like prophesizing the Afro-Asiatic anti-colonial struggles of the 20th century. And I think the amazing thing is that the evidence is all in the music. Even if we just look at Duke Ellington alone, who's composing from the early 20th century to the mid-late 20th century. Like by the 1960s, 1970s, his music is highly articulating that world consciousness that emerges from a world struggle and all humanity's struggle for this higher definition of freedom, this higher definition of democracy. And so, I mean, really what I'm trying to say is it's important to state that this music is revolutionary music. And there's more I want to say, but I think I need to think first. Yeah, I think someone else should speak first. There's more I want to
I have some advice for those of you that are doing research on these particular artists. I did it like a preliminary overview, and there are four things happening with me. Number one, me as a musician, just pursuing excellence or just improving myself, not commercial, then me making a living. See, some people know me in this town to play salsa music in bars where people drank and had fun. And then some people know me as playing classical music and recitals. So it depends on who's writing my story. And see, if
Fati, let me interrupt you. Let the other participants in the planning speak. And
Oh, okay, I didn't mean
Yeah, that's
because
okay.
you
That's
said
okay.
that you want somebody to speak.
Okay.
I'll take
Okay.
it. Forgive me.
You helped me come back. I
No,
can say a little bit more.
I don't want to get involved. I mean, I don't want to.
No. You have to be involved, but let the other
Yeah, but
planners.
what I
and
didn't
then- yeah,
mean is I
because-
didn't mean to disrupt the plan, because I brought something up about 2 weeks ago, but I was out of line. So
No.
take it back. No, I do, I take it back.
Okay. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Who wants to come next?
You wanted to say more?
Oh, well, I think this thing of why music, and it's to say that like we owe something to what these musicians have given, not just to Black folk, not just to the American people, but really to the world. And I think that the recovery of this music as revolutionary music has implications for the world revolutionary process. Because, and this is, I think, an ideological advancement that we made over the course of planning the music symposium, is to say that this is the music that declares what the problems and the struggle in the period after European modernity will be. And like, the closer you look at it, the more you find these very clear articulations of specific problems in specific periods, but also a struggle and even answers emerging through the music itself. And I don't, like, I feel what you're saying in the vision statement, because I totally agree that I do not think that this music has been treated with the seriousness and the intellectual seriousness that it deserves. Because I think something that, like, for example, I underestimated is how much of a commitment these musicians needed to make to knowledge itself and to an understanding of the world, like itself, in order to have, like, you describe it in your vision statement as basically this drive to know and to create. And when you were reading that, I was actually thinking about, again, like how much we as free school have to learn from these musicians, but how much we also owe to them as well. Because even take free school, for example, I think from the outside, I know for like, okay, my peers in the young generation, they might not understand why we are so dogged in our commitment, or why we are always searching for something new or searching to create something new out of like the collective that we have in free school. But like, tell me what's different between what we are aspiring for and what these musicians are aspiring for. It's that common reach for a future that comes from that common commitment to freedom in the concrete. And it was new for me to view like the artist that way. Yeah.
Do you want to, hold on, do you want to kind of lay out we're framing it over the 2 days? And so on?
Yeah, I can lay it out. Let me just pull up. So, okay, so to review, like everyone should definitely take flyers, but the music symposium is going to be in 2 weeks, and it's going to be here at the Church of the Crucifixion. And as Doc mentioned, we're dedicating it to these 4 composers who speak to a different period or are located at a slightly different point over the course of the struggle of colored modernity. Ra, Bootsy Collins, Duke Ellington, and Charles Mingus. And so the first day, which is exactly 2 weeks from today, will begin at 10 a.m., so the same time that preschool usually meet. And then we'll continue until 6 p.m. in the afternoon. And so for the first half of the program, after we do our introduction and reading of the vision statement, we want to dedicate to the body of Duke Ellington's musical and intellectual philosophical thought. And so we're going to break Duke Ellington tentatively into 2 portions. So for the first few hours, what we really want to examine and make a case for is Duke Ellington situated at the origin of the New World movement of thought. So for example, like Doc, in your statement, when you're talking about this music as a companion to Du Bois's intellectual rupture, like at the start of the 20th century, I think that we are going to make a case for that, or to further our understanding of that through like our treatment of Duke Ellington's music. And so there will be specific songs and specific suites that we're still finalizing, but some of them are like Mood Indigo, Black, Brown, and Beige. But actually we want to look a lot at the moment of the Harlem Renaissance in particular, and it's framed exactly as you described in your vision statement, through the disappointment of Reconstruction, coming based in the chronology of emancipation, but also like the Black proletariat's role in the Civil War and Reconstruction in particular. So seeing Reconstruction, partaking, the Black proletariat advancing that concrete democracy through the Reconstruction period, and then having it taken from them, like having it ripped away by the emerging white supremacist social system. That is the attitude that explains like the Harlem consciousness. And that's why we want to spend a significant amount of time to actually look at what was constituting this consciousness. Because what's also important about the Harlem period is that that's when we begin to see this emergence of a highly organized level of disciplined collective virtuosity. And like when we're talking about that in our planning meetings, I always think back to Du Bois and Black Reconstruction when he talks about how the slaves on the plantation, the enslaved Black proletariat on the plantation during the Civil War, even without communicating directly from plantation to plantation, understood when it was time to give their labor to the North and to embark on a general strike against like the plantation South. And why, right? Like why do they not need that direct communication? Or why could a rural people understand? Like why did they share a common worldview? And it's they had a common worldview because they had a high common consciousness and a consensus on what certain things mean. And what explains this music is like that common bent toward freedom to say, I know white supremacy, I know the scope of it, I know its reality, and I make my stand against it. And that is the only thing that could unlock, like, we'll see it in Duke Ellington's music, but that whole orchestra, 20, 30 people of musicians who doggedly take up these instruments and want to take them as far as they possibly can as a human voice to say something. So after that, we'll probably have a brief discussion, like maybe 45 minutes to an hour. And then to finish out, to round out our first portion of the symposium on Duke Ellington, we want to look at the unity of Pan-Africa and Pan-Asia and how much of a companion this music is, but how much it basically articulates the story of the world, like the all humanity struggle for freedom and what it can achieve. when the principles of Black civilization are taken up by the world, how Africa will look in the future, how Asia will look in the future, like when white supremacy does not exist anymore. And I think a lot of us are familiar with some of the music in this stage, but Isfahan from the Far East Suite, the Afro excerpts from the Afro-Eurasian Eclipse, but we also want to feature a lot of his performances in Africa or music that he dedicated explicitly to Africa and Asia. So for example, last night we watched a performance of a song that he titles La Plus Belle Africaine, which is, I think, like the most beautiful African woman. And he says, we wanted to prepare for our orchestra's trip to Africa. And so we composed this song. And we also felt it was right because we've been playing African music for our entire time as an orchestra. He said, we've already been playing African music for 35 years. And so I think that this portion, part of what we want to understand or what we want to explore is what, okay, we're making the case that Duke Ellington is situated at the origin of a new world movement of thought. He's an exemplar. And at the second portion, I think what we're going to try to uncover is what made possible this world consciousness so early. Because all of these Afro-Eurasian or Afro-Asian compositions he's making later in his life are also totally compatible with his worldview in 1910, in 1920. And it's just, the funny thing is that it's almost like world history and world events as they unfold in the 20th century, then begin to catch up to the consciousness of the Black proletariat. And I think we want to look at what the meaning of that is. And then, of course, I think we'll finish that section by returning to the civil rights movement, because he also was highly influenced by the Black freedom movement, always in step with the freedom movements of the world as they were occurring. And he was actually the first composer to dedicate a major composition to Keane. And so we're thinking of screening that. So at that point, we'll have a lunch break, and then we're going to move into Charles Mingus for the second half. So actually, a lot of our planning has been focused on Duke Ellington in particular. And maybe Doc knew this from the start, but it's not something that I think the rest of us had fully anticipated or expected. Because Duke Ellington essentially lays out a musical framework for, like, that is the groundwork for this music in the rest of the 20th century. And so even to look at Charles Mingus, Ra and Bootsy thereafter, it all goes back to Duke. And I think that's something that I think we're still trying to wrap our heads around the full scope of.
In fact, Mingus and Sun Ra talk about their indebtedness to Ellington.
Right.
Could you just say something about that first part and Mood Indigo, how we start, if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. Well, this was an interesting suggestion from Dot because, no, I think it was from you.
Yeah.
Because for the first portion, well, basically, I think it's tempting, or for me, it's somewhat tempting to think about this music chronologically. But I think that's why this framework of the new movement of thought is important, where you go with the substance or the philosophy of the music first, and you can't talk about the music by saying 1915, 1925, 1935. And so our original suggestion was beginning with the composition Black, Brown, and Beige, because that is Duke Ellington's first major composition where he's situating, like, the history of the American Negro in a revolutionary narrative, where he's saying the African slave and the African work song becomes the revolutionary Black proletariat in the battle for freedom, emancipation, and then the American Negro develops a new concept of freedom in the Harlem Renaissance. So that's how we wanted to start. But then Doc made the suggestion last night of saying, why don't we begin with Mood Indigo instead? Well, maybe you should say it because you made the suggestion. But
Good, that's Kathy.
Well, the word that you used to describe Mood Indigo that I was surprised by is the emergence of a new aesthetic. which I think I didn't take very seriously before, but the more you spoke, the more I think I came to understand that. It has everything to do with the leaps, and what we're describing is just how quickly, in the wake of the betrayal of Reconstruction and then the Great Migration, and African Americans becoming a people who not only emerge in the urban stage, but basically to take their debut on the world stage, essentially with this music, with their art in the Harlem Renaissance, with their ideas, with somebody like Du Bois, who had been working since the end of the 19th century into the 20th to lay a kind of framework and groundwork for what the Harlem Renaissance represented, which is a debut of something like a body and philosophy of ideas and a vision for freedom and democracy in this country, but also a music that could actually uniquely capture what the 20th century could really needed. That stage of modernity, it needed to be matched by an aesthetic, which I was really surprised that was the word we used to describe to characterize it. But it took me a long time to make the connection between mood, indigo meaning blue, meaning like blues and disappointment, the rhythmic narrative of a disappointed people. But in some ways we had charted, like your vision statement was just, it get really helpful. I'll just echo some of the things my first initial reactions, which is for some time there was, even on my part, like sort of even how to, like, confusion around how to like understand the genealogy of music, which I know is not really necessarily like the biggest point, but we do need to know something about how this originated and what role like the sorrow songs and the blues play, but also why is it that actually the music of Duke Ellington of the 20th century, yes, it like synthesizes, but the word you also used last night was it takes those elements and transcends it and is able to speak to the world, whereas blues and the sorrow songs are a people that have a message for the world, but they're still ultimately a little more regional, a little more parochial, still in like Mississippi or in South Carolina. But once you're in New York and you're conscious of like the Russian Revolution, you're conscious of Asia, Africa, you're listening to European music, you're taking those instruments, you're taking those sounds, what's that?
You fought overseas.
Oh yeah, and then also even traveling overseas, whether you're World War I, like soldier in a colored regiment and hearing the music of Europe, or or even like later on, of course, like traveling to Asia, to Africa, to Latin America, you begin to be able to, I like the word that you used, Michelle, prophesize, like the music that's necessary for the 20th century, in many ways laying the groundwork for what is like such a huge body of music that then comes out of it, which is why it's so helpful also how you connected, like in your vision statement,
Can I just say one thing? Just on this aesthetic thing and beauty, the elevation of beauty. Who could have predicted that out of the people just not that long out of slavery, and musicians whose parents were slaves, who grew up with such brutality, was this a turn to white bourgeois music, or was it a different aesthetic reflecting the life world of a people who had a vision of beauty, an imagination of beauty? And so that's why the mood indigo, Ellington's titles don't, because, for instance, Amiri Baraka would say that the music was for the emerging Black middle class, Black professional class. I don't agree with that. I think because you have to not only talk about Ellington, but the members of the orchestra. And these were not people who had gone to Juilliard or any place else to learn to play these instruments. They taught themselves or were taught by other musicians. And they achieved a new kind of virtuosity. And it gets to this idea of the enormity of the sacrifice and the drive and the purposefulness. And so mood indigo. And then we go to black and tan. And we see all of this beauty.
Right.
And the thing is, where did it come from? You know, this is still I'm sorry to have interrupted you, Kathy, but this is still something we're working out. And it's not just, you know, like sometimes people, when they say revolutionary music, it's, you know, almost a romanticization of the working class marching and, you know, but here you have a new spirit of art and beauty that moves to the vanguard of a people's struggle for freedom. It is quite extraordinary. But I'll show you.
Can I say one more thing? Well, back to this thing of like why music is, I think what these musicians and these artists also exemplify is a commitment to the empire of eternity, which, and the reason is that, like, this is something that I think is important that you always emphasize, is that they were living under the harshest, these musicians emerged like under the harshest conditions of white supremacy, Jim Crow, poverty. And I think that's very important to remember when we say, like, where did that purity and that clarity of vision come from? That optimism, that love.
Yeah.
I think even when you laid out the three things that the Black proletariat imaginary embodies, which maybe someone else remembers, but you said love, the moral imperative.
And freedom.
Yeah, and the commitment to freedom, none of which are present in the European musical like lexicon. It's that commitment to the empire of eternity, which I think actually we have a lot to learn from, where I think that we aspire toward as free school, where it's through art alone in some ways that you can so freely and so purely express that new world, not just for your people, but for your country's people, and ultimately for the world's people. That, like, is what makes it ironic or funny in a way that we are still trying to catch up to this music 100 years from now. I mean, like 100 years later, or how, like, as China modernizes, like, I just hope that they can find their way to Black music. Like, I hope India remembers what it meant in the culture. It's like, went to India. And I think that we're going to be, okay, the last thing I want to say is, I agree with your formulation that in many ways the symposium is a beginning. And it's a very important one as we increasingly see the centrality of art and music to the democratic, the democratic struggle for freedom today. Because I feel like I didn't say this well enough earlier, but I think it's significant, this thing that you're highlighting of maybe for the first time in modern history, to this extent, artists and musicians moving to the vanguard of the democratic struggle, and they're coming from everywhere. There are many of them. It's not one genius, two geniuses 10 years apart. No, it's Johnny Hodges with Ben Webster, with Harry Carney, all playing with Duke Ellington, and now you bring in like blah, 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 blah. Bud Powell, Charles Mingus, Thelonious Monk, Nina Simone, and it's not just musicians, it's the dancers. It's the painters, like, so like, what is that? And has it been properly situated?
And this is what we're trying to grasp.
Oh yeah, I think that is.
And just a quick thing, and hold it, David, but the rapidity with which this happened, it happened so quickly. It consolidated so quickly. And this is why they did not turn their back on European modernity.
No.
They took it seriously, perhaps more seriously than white American composers and musicians. You know, but they surpassed it. I often talk about Gustav Mahler, who is, you know, the movie Tar was kind of based on his music, his 10 symphonies, yada, 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 yada. But when you listen to him, it is almost infantile compared to the complexity of Ellington. And then when you get to Mingus and so on. But how, and this is what we're still trying to figure out. How this happened. You know, you get like Questlove from the Roots who make the statement, well, the hip hoppers and the rappers had to use the turntable as an instrument because they took music out of the schools. These musicians had, Johnny Hodges didn't have no music classes. So what are you saying? How did they do it?
Right.
Who taught Ellington? Who taught Fletcher Henderson? So this excuse for mediocrity and moral abandonment, we cannot accept, given what happened. And this, remember, Reconstruction is overturned in 1877. By 1900, you have Louis Armstrong, Bolden, Sidney Bechet, and all of these people creating new music in a virtuosic level. And that's what we're trying to understand. And we still don't have it, but I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I think maybe so.
Good.
Oh, yeah.
Just real quick, I was trying to keep my mouth shut. This is a beautiful discussion. Just read everyone's words. It reminded me of something Mr. Farrakhan said about struggle in general. He said that he asked a question. He said, "Where would we be without pain?"
Without who?
Without pain. And he said, "Pain is the mother of pain, and pain is the mother of creativity." So from our struggle, he said, "Who taught us?" Right? It was something that's innate in us. But he also said that at the root of everything in creation is the desire for love, peace, and happiness. So in the music, we found a way to communicate our desire for that peace, that freedom that we didn't have. And we couldn't describe it. Nina Simone was asked the question, what does she think freedom is? You know, and she tried to define it as having no fear. But we are seeking to identify, find ourselves and our nature. And music, and the composition of the music is a language that's not easily identifiable, but it connects with every race, humanity all over the earth. And for people who have their identity and humanity stripped, that music, there's a message in the music. And it's just beautiful. Thank you.
I think
Hold on, wait a minute. You want to say something, sir? Let's tease this out. We got to get to the concrete of the symposium itself. So you want to say something more, Michelle, about the first day? Please, so people have a sense of the structure of the symposium. I don't mean to cut anybody off, but we're trying to work out and give everyone a sense of what these 2 days will look like. Go ahead.
Well, did I?
No, go. You go. You know.
Okay. Well, do you want to move on to Charles Mingus or stay?
Yes, on to Mingus, and then
Okay, so the majority of the body of the first day is going to be Duke Ellington, and Charles Mingus is also Duke Ellington is part of what we're saying. So when we move into Mingus, this is something that we're still. So okay, so we have a break after finishing Duke Ellington, and everyone can go get lunch. And then we'll come back at 2 p.m. And then we'll move into Mingus, who is a generation coming after Duke Ellington and grows up, is, becoming conscious much more in the time of the Black freedom movement itself. And so I think that's what a lot of the music that we will be playing will articulate. So one of the songs that we're thinking of beginning with is Epitaph, which, so Mingus.
Well, it's more than a song. It's a suite, a 3-hour suite,
Yes.
produced by Mingus, written by Mingus, and only produced 20, 30 years after he dies by his wife. This is hugely important. But I'm sorry. No, see, the significance is the symphonic, the urge to produce symphonies,
Yeah.
big pieces. Ellington kept an orchestra of 16 pieces throughout his life. And that was a struggle, you know, in fact, when they would travel, they couldn't stay in hotels. They'd have to sleep in the train cars. They'd have to, you know, go to the bathroom in the bushes, couldn't eat. They were treated abysmally and degraded, you know, but yet they produced this. But then Mingus comes up in more relative freedom, but he produces, which he did not live to see perform. And we're still trying to work on what the title means. But I think we begin with several of his earlier pieces, small group pieces, don't we?
So we haven't decided the exact order yet.
Yes, yes.
So, well, some of the works that we're thinking of are Duke Ellington's Sound of Love, Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, It Was a Lonely Day in Selma, Alabama, Epitaph, and then his live performances with Bud Powell.
With Bud Powell. This is hugely significant.
Yes.
Huge. And then Mingus performing with Ellington and Max Roach.
Oh, wow.
Right.
You know, one of those
Money
people
Jungle.
in the album Money Jungle.
Yes.
You know, but we, you know, because time is a factor, but the depth of this, you know, where, but you know, and so to see, I don't know how many people have ever heard Bud Powell. He's one of the founders of what is called modern jazz, or post-World War II jazz. And in some ways, he is equal in impact to Thelonious Monk. But to see, and I think they were performing somewhere in Europe,
They were performing in France in 1960.
Yes,
With Eric
and with Eric Dolphy and Booker Irving on tenor, and Johnny Cole on trumpet. Well, these names, you when you see them, and Danny Richmond on drums, and to see Mingus, the virtuosity on the bass. This is something. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I think other people should say more about
No,
the
keep on going. Keep on going.
Yeah, well, I wanted to go to Epitaph again in particular because I think this is something that came up in our conversation last night, but Charles Mingus has a lot more irony where he can be more scathing, but in a very sharp and beautiful way than Duke Ellington. He's coming out of a different period, right? And he's also a different man. But in Epitaph, I think that the way that he talks about it, he says that it's because he know that he will be degraded by the white supremacist social system his entire life, that as an artist, like he will, like he can be free as an artist through his art, but society is unfree in a way that has not evolved a place for his genius yet. And recognizing that, he writes his own epitaph, which is traditionally like something that is dedicated to you once you die. And he said, because I know my record will not, like the society will never respect my actual life and my actual record, I'm going to compose my own death letters, essentially. And so my understanding of epitaph is that it remained incomplete in his life, and it was after he died that it was reconstructed from his papers, which, by the way, probably were not archived like well, right? You know, and I think what we want to understand is like what is constituting the consciousness, or what is constituting the consciousness of Mingus as an artist? Because Epitaph is one example of a very mature worldview that he has developed, like at this stage, and a criteria for art, but also a criteria for like the human being, and then a criteria for society.
And actually, see, with Mingus, he publicly performs his anxiety and anger with the system. Sun Ra will do it also, but in a different way. But the thing about Mingus is that he is really at heart a gentleman, a loving man. But he must, as he would see it, take a moral position against evil. And that's what he's doing. And to see him in contrast to Ellington, although building on Ellington, and so on. And the other thing, in the small group performances, you can, and because they couldn't afford to keep a big band, a big orchestra, so you would hear in the separate instruments the pieces or parts for a larger orchestra. And so he is like Michelle said, a different personality, a different man from a different time. He's not from the South, he's from the far West. He's mixed race, although he is Black identified, he is completely committed without any
Half-stepping.
What'd you say?
Half-stepping.
Well, I wouldn't say half-stepping, without the subtlety or nuancing of it. For instance, during civil rights, there was a governor of Arkansas who stood up against fables for fathers. It's like the study of the white supremacist social system by study of this one man and his opposition to Black civil rights.
Well, can I say, I think the evidence of Charles Mingus and his music is the development, like the movement into essentially a deepening crisis or like deepening complexity of modernity. When Du Bois describes the problem of the 20th century as the problem of the color line, by the time we reach Mingus at that stage, we are deep in it. And I think that he has a more developed concept of evil than Duke Ellington does, where he's saying there is a such thing as an enemy, and it is what white supremacy has done to the consciousness of the people, and like it is the white man. And his music is articulating exactly who that enemy is, but also constantly subverting it, saying like, well, here's Duke Ellington's Sound of Love, in case you forgot. This is our standard. This is our criteria for beauty, for art. But then, yes, he has a lot of like tart irony, like fables of
Faultless.
like there's like no song like that. It's dedicated to approach segregation, like governor, like. And I mean, imagine how humiliating that is for the white man if he has enough morals to be humiliated. Like he's not afraid. No, it's it's almost satirical.
And see, the thing is, like, Mingus always felt that he was being slighted by the music industry.
Yeah, which
they would prefer Miles Davis to a man that stood up and spoke his mind and said it without fear.
Yes.
So this was and you'll see it in his music. It's Ellingtonian. He never forgets and never stops saying this.
Well, can I say one more thing? Is I think Epitaph is significant, and we might consider starting with it because he was saying that he already knew that he had paid the ultimate price of a revolutionary artist.
Yeah.
Which is that I'm sacrificing my life for the struggle for freedom. Yeah. And whatever it takes, I will go there. And I'm not afraid.
Well, it's also, we've come across a lot of, and I feel like Crystal, you should sing one because I think you've been looking a lot into this too. But like I think in line with everything we're talking about, he had such high standards for jazz musicians and the jazz industry, but also for art and beauty in music. And I'm trying to understand it better, but it's very clear that we do have to acknowledge him, like through what the evidence of even something like Epitaph, like what like vision he had for composition.
Yeah.
And like I'm looking again at the notes, and it's that he had about, it's like 22 musicians, parts for 22 musicians, and all over 30 movements or something,
Wow.
incorporating obviously a lot of the works that songs he had been working on his whole life, but in a new configuration that was fitting of something as large as a symphonic orchestra. And it's clear that he was so dissatisfied even then with many fellow musicians who were not challenging themselves to truly take up what it meant to be a composer and the responsibility that comes from it. He was so dissatisfied with the music that was being put out as entertainment, and rather than actually striving for a higher consciousness. But I think that is something that will be also incorporated into our program, to actually read aloud some of these musicians in their own words, to be able to pair with the music and the performances that we're seeing. But I don't know.
Well, something that we've been talking about with Mingus is that his music is militant. We used that word yesterday, and I think that's like an important expression that we don't see with Duke Ellington, for example. And I feel like it's important to look at these artists and these musicians in the context of how they come head to head with the white supremacist social system, as the white supremacist social system is becoming more and more sophisticated over time. And I think you see that most clearly in the way Mingus has been disenfranchised throughout his life. We were talking about this clip that's on YouTube from a documentary of Mingus getting evicted, and how humiliating that.
And all his music is just scattered all over the streets.
Oh, yeah.
Like his compositions.
He was evicted from his apartment.
Yes. And even it's not even just Epitaph where he acknowledges that he's paying the ultimate price, and therefore will never be able to see his composition performed. But it's also even in his liner notes for Black Saint and the Sinner Lady, where he says explicitly, I wrote the music for dancing and listening. It is true music with much and many of my meanings. It is my living epitaph from birth to the day I first heard of bird and diz. Now it is me again. This music is only one little wave of styles and waves of little ideas my mind has encompassed through living in a society that calls itself sane. As long as you're not behind iron bars, where there at least one can't be half as crazy in most of the ventures our leaders take upon themselves to do and think for us, even to the day we should be blown up to preserve their idea of how life should be. So that tartness, which there's a sardonic tone, and I think that's also seen in stuff like The Clown, and why does that have to be the stage of of consciousness in response to the white supremacist social system? And you see that taken even further with Sun Ra, or taken in a new way with Sun Ra, and also Bootsy. And I think that's what we'll be reaching for and continuing to try to build out as we move forward with planning for the symposium. The one other thing I wanted to say about what Mingus talks about in his what is a jazz composer essay is how he conceptualizes improvisation, which I think is really important, and I feel very timely for how a lot of people conceptualize jazz today. And when he comes head to head with the music industry, where his record label's literally not releasing his compositions, and instead favoring releasing the music of Miles Davis or John Coltrane, even when Mingus is actually making certain advances in music that Miles Davis and Coltrane are later employing and deploying, which means that he doesn't get credit for some of the innovations that he's making for music at that time. When you see that kind of coming head to head with him in the music industry, I think you also can see more clearly, like, what it is that Mingus had to sacrifice and also what it meant for him to make those sacrifices at that time. And I think it does give us more clarity for when we look at like this moment and what it means for us to make a political commitment now in the face of like the commercialization of music being used as cognitive manipulation, and what it would take for us to recover this music.
And I think establishing a criteria to judge this music, that these musicians, just because they can play an instrument, don't get a free pass. You know, that's a
Well, back to this. Well, I feel like even from our conversation, part of what we're uncovering, which is also the purpose of the symposium, is how this music taken over the span of a century is essentially perhaps a more dramatic or even more true like narrative of the strivings of the American people in the period after emancipation, in the period of resolving the unresolved questions of modernity. Because something that we've also been talking a lot about is what is it that music can say more clearly than any other language? And even today, like let's take Japan for example. Like if their relationship to America is mediated through the news or like the academy, that looks one way. But what I believe in most is like their relationship to America through the music of Marvin Gaye and like the drumming of Max Roach and Art Blakey and like Coltrane, right? Like Coltrane's visit to Hiroshima, the full like that all humanity like union. And I think that it's significant the way we're actually trying to concretize the specific conditions that each musician was operating out of, because for me, it's almost like a greater or more dramatic or a truer articulation of like the movements and the strivings of Black people at the vanguard of the American people in the 20th century. Because this thing of strivings, like the souls of Black folk, that was the last thing I wanted to say about Mood Indigo was, I think we situate it at the beginning because out of all of his early compositions, maybe that one gets closest to mirroring Du Bois's Souls of Black folk. Like Souls of Black folk of our spiritual strivings. And why it's important to centralize the striving. Like it's important to centralize because this is a nation where uniquely it has not become yet what it must become. Like this is a nation which exists but has not yet achieved itself. And that is essentially like a very modern problem. Or I don't know if we really have another example of a country like that in modern history. And there's something where like art and music becomes very, very important for piercing to the truth of things. It's closer to the souls, like the soul, the truth, and the strivings, like the striving, the chance element of where this nation can go.
That's right. And see this question, this music is a special thing because it highlights the moral imperative.
Yes.
But could we move on to some
Wait, can I say, can I,
I'm sorry.
I'm trying to like gather myself. But I do want to add that the music is like a moral instigation to the intellectual, philosophical, and scientific.
Yes.
Like worldview, and I wanted to bring that up as it relates to our discussions of like a language, a new language. And I'm only bringing all of this up because the importance of music and in parallel, like we're saying, whether that be that parallel between Duke and Du Bois or that companionship, is that whole people in their striving for all humanity, either project or freedom that is a modern engagement and a modern struggle. And It's very beautiful, and I think that Curtis Mayfield quote almost captures the spirit of how much that what is outputted is also what is received, that what is desired for or doggedly striven for by the individual artist in a group of, comes back now to reflect what you're saying is the criteria. Not only for struggle, but for a world that is like ready, teething to be born. I wanted to bring that up because the intellectual and probing investigation that all of whom is mentioned, Mingus, Ellington, Sun Ra, and we have to talk more about Bootsy.
We want to go to Sun Ra.
I know, but
We want to go to Sun Ra.
I'm just saying that the work, the music is in par with the scientific thinking, the intellectual.
This is going to be, could we go directly to Bootsy? Because this is another dimension, because he does talk about science, and we haven't worked it out yet. What this body, what this over that is impatient, that says that modern man has failed and will fail until he understands, and this is what I'm, so on and so forth. This is a dimension of the worldview. Sun Ra is from Birmingham, Alabama, grew up in segregation, didn't know nothing but segregation, and sees the white world as an anti-human failure. And so his concept of space, an alternative place to this one, and then this huge body of work, even larger than Ellington.
Yes.
It's maybe the largest body of recorded music in the history of the United States, maybe of the world.
I think so.
He was constantly producing, and then the monastic lifestyle, of which we're going to visit his house in Germantown. But this is this next dimension. This is the second day. And we've worked out the first day more than the second day at this point. And how we understand and explore Sun Ra. Both the performance, but the composition. And how he looks back to Ellington and Fletcher Henderson too, but more Ellington, I think. And how he maintains an orchestra damn near the same size as Ellington, 16 pieces. And but music driven by a worldview.
Right. That's
the concretization of a worldview which is anti-racist, and this is he doesn't tiptoe around that question. And first of all, he often said in his orchestra, no drugs, no alcohol, no white women. That's what he said. And, even to this day, there is not a white person that has ever played in the Sun Ra Orchestra. Although there are thousands all over the world who would love to say, I played in the Sun Ra Orchestra. He felt that white people were so damaged by their civilization that they would bring a toxicity to the music, to the orchestra. and the purity of the sound that he wished to produce. And he spoke of it that way. The purity of the sound that he wanted, which he said he never achieved, by the way. But this is huge. And to treat him as he is now with Marshall Allen and his orchestra, some kind of exotic, crazy, fun thing for
It's a carnival show.
a carnival show and a performance for white hip intellectuals. You know what I'm saying? That ain't Sun Ra. Well, go ahead.
Just on him, and the question about how he kept his band together, like the moral obligation was so strong. And like he said that there was one time he had a guy who had left Sun Ra, and then was playing in like the jazz circuit or whatever. And like he had to cut his hair and he started drinking and stuff. And then he said that when he had come back, he was told how he had to act as if not of himself. And so Sun Ra was like, he kissed me on the cheek and he told me that I wanted to be back because I wanted to be myself. I wanted to be able to.
Right. This is huge. I hope everybody understands what Seraphine is saying. There was a freedom to create and to think in the Sun Ra Orchestra. That's why a guy like John Gilmore, the tenor saxophonist, he said, I played a gig, I thought it was easy. And the more he got into the music, the more complexity he understood it to be. And, you know, Sonny comes at the end of the 20th century. At the end of with the crisis, he dies in the 90s, but the crisis of the white system was already apparent. And Sun Ra, and we'll work it out, Sun Ra has an all-humanity concept, but a humanity that must transform if it is to save itself.
Right.
And a denial of material wealth, of money, that even, just so you know, sometimes you would see musicians in his orchestra. By the way, he would name the orchestra, and sometimes it would be called the Myth Science Orchestra, the Cosmic Science Orchestra, art, you know. And so it's all so much metaphor, so much irony, and such and so. And, you know, being from the South, when you hear Sun Ra speak, he speaks with a heavy Black Southern accent. You know what I'm saying? Which would make him easily dismissed by white people. You know, if you don't talk white, you ain't intelligent. They you know, that's the way they roll. And he and they all knew this training that they didn't speak a lot, but Sun Ra speaks a lot. He does interviews and such and such.
Kind of interesting because, you know, Sun Ra, end of the 20th century. Exactly. Instead of it being a journey he's born in the deep south, right? Instead of it being a journey from the south to the north, he's saying, I'm trying to go to space. Like, it's almost like, I'm not trying to go to space of destruction. I'm heading towards space. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, space. That's so interesting.
And he believed that music was actually, like, I love the story from the biography, Space is the Place, where one time apparently he was just on the road and he was actually kind of kidnapped. And so his ransomers were, we hear you're going to try to take people to space. Like, how are you going to do it without a spaceship? How much gasoline are you going to use? Like, how are you going to do it without NASA? And he's like, actually, it's music. My music is the vessel that brings people to space. And actually, it's that everyone like has if everyone can just actually hear what this music is demanding of you, the consciousness, right? Like, that it requires, like, therefore, like, it's actually in the future, it is really music that will power our cities, like determine our social relations. He was always like 17 steps ahead of what the current conception would always be. And he was always interested in space even before the space age. And he was always paying attention to developments, and which is why when we were talking, when Serafina, you brought up the music as a instigation to a pursuit of knowledge and truth. Like the person that came to mind out of all of them did, but especially Sun Ra. And so he was always reading and apparently always even lecturing in the public in like parks. But also whenever they would be composing in the house with the whole orchestra, sometimes it'd be like discussion, not too different than this one. Sometimes it would be like, experimenting and playing and rehearsing, but a lot of it was also reading. And actually, I'm so grateful that, I don't know if Brother Hassan is here anymore, but I don't. Like, actually, what I found really interesting is that there's so many influences that Sun Ra draws on. Egypt, of course, his name coming from, Ra, meaning like the sun god, but also spiritual science, but actually his time in Chicago for about 20 or some years, a couple years, years meant that he was actually in the same orbit, literally like as the Nation of Islam. And while it never was the exact same, there's so much influence around this idea, this focus on science, this focus on discipline, this focus on even the mothership, or
the mothership,
which of course brings us to Bootsy. But the idea that, or even this cosmology, or even this how whiteness is understood, even as as white supremacy being evil that has tainted the society and has suppressed people's souls and ability to know the universe and to know one another. And there's a really interesting overlap there. And that is something that I'm really glad that your vision statement brings up.
And maybe we can go to, it's the second day of Sun Ra and Bootsy, funk, as it were.
Right. Well,
And by the we're not, when people talk about funk, they include everybody from the Lakeside Band to the Get Gap Band to Sly and the Family Stone.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, and Bootsy, Bootsy's Rubber Band. It is distinct and different. It's not just, a certain musical form. It is a certain philosophical and ideological approach.
Yes.
A certain literary approach in the use, again, of metaphor, very similar to Sun Ra. The literary, the ironic, the metaphor. And as you see in Bootsy, there's always this narrative which satirizes the white world. It is deeply anti-white supremacist, and he presents himself as the extreme outside of the what I used to say about you, eccentric. No, an extreme eccentric, who embraces his eccentricity as a way of saying, I see you in ways that you don't see yourself. But that's all.
Yeah, I think the connection between Sun Ra and Bootsy would be really interesting. I mean, also they're interested in the mothership connection as well. That's literally a song from George Clinton. Well, anyway, I am curious. We haven't talked about it in our meetings, but I have picked up in different interviews from Bootsy or George Clinton that the way Sun Ra conceived of his music, as we were talking before, as transcending the color line or poverty or all of these suppressive forces that have especially limited the possibilities of Black folk. That sometimes they talk about funk as like a liberation from this world and into something higher. I don't know if it's just developed, it's like funk is what will free your mind. Funk is, that's just something I think we need to explore further.
It was George.
And that the white world is at the end of the day a joke. And they propose an alternative world, one nation under a groove, getting down just for the funk of it. The white man says one nation under God, dedicated to liberty and justice for all. You see how they undercut it? You're nothing, one nation. See, when you satirize, but see, it's a throwback to it flips the minstrelsy practice.
Right.
Where the
right.
white man put on blackface to mock and trivialize Black people. At the end of the 20th century, now we see who you are, and your nation under God is a fake. And our alternative is one nation under a groove, getting down just for the funk of it. You understand what I'm saying? And so it continues a profound anti-white supremacy in consciousness. And so
Reminds me of the Nation of Islam and Dr. Yaqub.
Yeah, well, definitely Dr. The Mothership and Dr. Yaqub. Yeah, they both. I guess we can open the thing. Yeah, we just wanted to lay out.
Well, can I say one more thing about Bootsy is, I think he's important for this thing that we've been talking about in terms of we have to state that like the American people have been cognitively manipulated, and that there has been a counter-revolution on the consciousness and like the imagination of the American people, and especially young people since the Black Freedom Movement. And I think that Bootsy is basically working out of that framework, or even developing like a strategy for undoing that cognitive manipulation. And I think he uses satire to deploy it.
So y'all can see, we got a lot it'll be a very rich 2 days. And then on Sunday at the end, we're gonna have a dance party and just play music and, relax a little bit.
Yeah.
So maybe we should open it up.
I have something to say because I have to
Oh,
go.
yeah, go ahead.
I'm not going to take up much time, but I won't be able to attend a lot of classes because I have a performance schedule coming up. That's why I came today, to tell all of you, this is a fantastic opportunity to express yourself. I'm really impressed with the research. And a lot of things I say, it's really to give advice. And it dawned on me when I said something about Dr. Pamherder last week or 2 weeks ago, and then I said something about the Pope. Yeah, I agree with you. I was just trying to encourage us to understand that Du Bois was exposed to that. And when I do research, it's not that I agree or disagree. I just look at all dimensions. And the only thing I was going to say, and something took me a while. When I was coming up, I have this admiration of musicians, and I think they were great. Then I found out so-and-so's a crackhead or something. Meaning that I didn't assume what he was singing about was what he loved. And I was just going to say to you, when you do your research, the tendency of non-musicians, a lot of time, they will look at the musician to be something special when you see the entire dimension. For instance, how does he dress? How does he present himself to the public? Does he play dance music? Does he charge? Is it pro bono? Is he amateur? No, just look at every aspect of the musician. It doesn't mean you're going to reject him. For instance, because Duke Ellington had a contracted band at the Cotton Club, that doesn't take away from the value of Duke's intellectualism in terms of music, meaning he was a master businessman. So if you look and say, well, how did he keep a job, keep musicians working? How do you keep the band together? You keep the musicians working. So I'm saying, I noticed that nobody brought that up here about Duke playing for white audiences in a Cotton Club. that was that time. How do you keep a job? How do you keep musicians working, keep the band together if every 2 weeks you call? Well, I know from playing, if a band calls me every 2 weeks, I stray away. Now, if he's called me every week, and I have a performance every Saturday, Pretzel Park here and here, it's that I love him? No, I can count. Now, am I going to participate in buffoonery and minstrelsy? No, I mean, as long as it's decent music. But you can't assume what the musician is into just because you see him on stage. A lot of it gets into ethnography. Ask him, interview him. What do why are you playing this? Well, I just need a job and I don't want to work for the post office. That doesn't mean he's not talented. That's the only thing my advice, since you're doing so much intensive research, to look at I always look at where the music performs, how does it present himself, how does he talk about his music? And then so I didn't want to act as if I'm trying to change your way of thinking about these musicians as much as just look at every aspect of dimension of the musician. For instance, the only reason I brought up about some people only know me as a salsa player, I made money. Yeah, I like the idea. See, but my attitude is not Latin music, it's African music in Latin America. Now, nobody wanted to hear my point of view. Oh, no, this is Spanish music. No, it's African music in America. Okay, now, but when I got the money, I said, look, just pay me, let me go home, dance my own bachata or whatever. So if you really want to know how I feel, you go ask me, look, do you really think that this is Spanish music? Then the musician will say, oh, no, this is African music, came out of the colonial period, or this is Spanish music. So I just want to say, I think you're all great scholars. You're really intelligent. You have a master professor and this symposium, and to bring out the positive aspect of these musicians. They're not drug addicts. They're not crackheads. They're visionaries. And what I like about all of you is you looked at them more than entertainers. I think that's what Tony was trying to do. When you listen to quote black music, well, what's black about? Like I think what all you were about Duke is here he is kind of like Pan-African. Okay, like that. I was going to bring it up about and I studied caravan. As a matter of fact, I have an arrangement of it. And I noticed it was based on the Phrygian mode, which is a common mode in North Africa. So it's not based on, see, when you start talking about the style, the question is the rhythmic style, does he draw African rhythms like Sun Ra, or does he allude to Africa? Does he allude to that? And then Duke collaborated with that Quanti Soul from Puerto Rico, and they based it on this beat. I'm going to show you. Da, 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 da. So what it is, he throws mixes in an Afro-Cuban beat with a melodic line from the Mediterranean, and then he gets a Puerto Rican arranger to collaborate with. So I was when I said to consider dimensions, I was just encouraging all of you. Many times you got to take it and get an idea map and say, now what are these things? What should I know about Mingus? I know he didn't like people to talk when he played. Like that means you don't have respect for my playing. Or is that's the main characteristic of classical European music. When you go to those concert halls, everybody's like this. And then like this. Whereas in black oriented dance environments, people are moving around talking. It doesn't mean they don't have respect. It's a cultural thing. So many times it gets into the venue. So I was just saying, if you don't see me and I don't come all the time, it's because I had a gig. And it's not that the money is more important, all of you. You're doing a great job. And I'm totally impressed with the research. The dimensions of which that you broke down Ellington and even Bootsy Collins, he's just a boogaloo brother or something. No, what you did is you're looking at I look at them as cultural genres. What I see why Tony picked those four. Duke, the orchestra, then you got
Mingus.
the visionary, that last piece I listened to, when I listened to, I said, "Oh, I see what he's doing." He was out of space. He was actually breaking away. You know, so I see what it is. So definitely, when you don't see me, it's not that's not important.
But we have to see you.
No, I will come when I can. As I said, what I would like to do one day is actually talk about and go to the piano and talk about, well, what's black about the blues? What do we mean by black sounding music?
Yeah.
That's that, as I said, the pentatonic scale. What's the relationship between the pentatonic and the spiritual? What's the relationship between the Phrygian mood and Duke Ellington? Why is he drawing on a Phrygian mood, which is characteristic of North Africa?
Yeah.
What is he saying? Someone brought up that in the performance itself, the product itself tells you what he wants to include, you know, and that's what I heard today. And I just wanted you all to know that whenever I know I have a tendency to talk to them, it's not because I'm trying to make people. What I learned, you don't try to change people. What you do, you just give them information and you let them decide. That's what you do. And then, and also don't be blinded by the name. Like even when you say boogaloo, some people feel like it's something down the bottom, of funk music. A lot of times the words in African American culture you find in Latin America is to draw on a feeling, like the idea of, they say in Spanish, el sabor, the soul, the spirit. You know, the academics call it frenzy. So a lot of these words are to make the person feel the essence, the aesthetic. That's the word. That's the word I would suggest if you could add that dimension. I think Tony's bringing it up. What is the black aesthetic in Duke Ellington? And that's general.
And how would you define the black
I think
aesthetic in
the
Ellington?
black aesthetic is number one, participatory versus non-participatory. When I say that, and I look at, you go to a concert where they're doing a Beethoven symphony, you walk in the door, you can't say da 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 da. You start moving, they say that's non-participatory. Now you go into a nightclub, could be a dance club or a jazz club. Before it starts, everybody's talking. Yeah, they can't wait. Oh yeah, Duke is gonna play. You feel all this movement. Part of the black aesthetic is the totality of the performance event.
The totality.
Now, when you bring the dance in, you got the solos, like in salsa, you got the solo player, and then everybody's dancing, and everybody's smiling, spinning, and turning, and what have you. And then the music starts playing faster. That's the ritual element. Because if you know anything about rituals, the music is getting faster where people just flip out. That's typical when I play with Latin bands. By the end of the night, I would be burnt out because I started with dun, 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 dun. Then at night, dun, 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 dun. I thought, please, when we gonna stop this magic? But the idea is it didn't get, let me get slower. It seems like it's getting faster, but it gets more energy. So the aesthetic in black music has a ritualistic component. If you look at gospel music in one of these churches, I lived in the South. By the time the service is over, it went on for 4 hours. And then you get the call and response. One singer, and they keep saying, da, da, da. You know, and then the chorus gets short and the vocal line gets long, and they go all night long. Again, notice it, participatory. So the event, you know.
No, that just reminds me just on the thing about funk music. The energy coming from the people, coming from the music. And the same thing goes with funk music. The revolutionary striving comes from what the people, the music, the back and forth. It's a never ending, why would there be, like, if you will, there's no such thing as nihilism in the aesthetic. There's no such thing as like, because there's always an answer to a problem. And the answer to the problem is also within the revolutionary vision, striving, the everything.
But also, you know, the whole thing about rituals, people perspire. It's like a dance They went 4 hours, everybody dancing, and by the end of the dance, all the dancers perspire. But sometimes you get a certain smell in the environment. I know playing salsa band. You
Right.
go in, everything smells like perfume. But when you go out, it smells
Like,
it's not a bad smell. See, what you learn is the smell of a person who has worked all day in the field.
right.
You have to learn that's not a bad smell. It is the smell of someone who has worked and that suffered. And so funk, if you look at this so-called bad smell,
Exactly, right.
it's a real smell.
It's, yeah, it's that.
And that's the black aesthetic. It's real.
Right, it's that real.
And it comes in Brazil, it comes in Cuba, it comes in Puerto Rico. Whenever you hear somebody doing like, now how can somebody beat on the drum with their hands for 10 hours? And if you shake a hand
It's
of a
gonna be
conguero player, it feels
everything.
like leather.
Everything, yeah.
So that you know, why would he put himself through that pain? It's not pain.
Right.
It's part of the aesthetic. That's his degree. If your hand
Right,
feels like
Exactly,
leather,
exactly.
you are the Magimbe. You number
Exactly.
one.
exactly.
Not the PhD. See, that's the downfall of the academy. They've got us where we get prim proper, we put on we get the cologne, give lectures, publish, yak, and over, can't even do a apostle goblet, can't dance anymore, can't do anything. Only you can do is talk. You know, I think so. See, I don't hear people talk about Sonia Sanchez when she used to talk about that Black arts movement that was really famous, which is the extension of Harlem Renaissance. She talked about the aesthetics. See, what it does, it gives a validation and dignity to a way of thinking that is not Eurocentric. Yeah, and I didn't want to, I would just say, I would suggest all of you, if you could present a lot of the musicians, their aesthetic is their worldview. What Sun Ra, why is he alluding to Egypt? He's given a historical dimensions of blackness, that it goes outside of the Gregorian calendar. That's yeah, and then too, the idea he didn't follow the European form of ABA, you know,
Right.
clear cut, first section, section. You know, a lot of times the sections were atmospheric. He starts
atmospheric.
atmospheric. So when I listen to something, you know, he starts out.
Yeah, with the
It's almost like outer space, like you hear as you went through the black hole when you hear, you know, like out. And see, the thing about the European aesthetic, when you study music and composition, they say, oh, here's section A, here's section B, here's section C. Oh, and you know when the song begins, you know when it ends. The black aesthetic, you don't know exactly when it begins because sometimes it can start with a moan like, and then next thing you know, people start to move. Then when it gets near the end, people get tired and then they fall asleep. But so you don't have a clock that says, oh, it started at. I know playing jazz band. Okay, we have a chart. We can rehearse it, get it done in 2-3 minutes. We on the job, we open up the call and response section. And if we find out it makes people dance, we'll play that section for 10 minutes. You know, but what's in rehearsal, we only do it. You find it in African American music, the whole concept of the jam section.
Oh, do you think the concept of call and response might be the reason why so much of the music was developed so fast, like over that period of time? Because it's almost like research and development where you're kind of like going back and forth, like sort of seeing, oh, this is not just that. And then also, like maybe with classical music, everything is sort of more strict, which means when somebody's like learning something, they sort of just will play it exactly how they learned it. Whereas with the, you know, blues and other songs, they were just giving their interpretation back to what they heard. And so over time, things might change.
Well, see, what happens in getting back to the black aesthetic in terms of the compositional process is that you incorporate the learning and creating while you're learning the fundamentals. So like you take the blues, okay, like a singer, they'll learn one set of words, but then the woman's husband leaves her.
Right.
And all of a sudden next week she's got 2 verses. Then she loses her job the 3rd week. So she keeps the same blues structure, but this is just a song text. So it's unfolding the story of this person's life with the same structure. Now, getting to the call and response, if you know about the call and response, the chorus stays the same, but the response is the narrative, the story. Like if a person has a story about something, it comes out in the narrative component, you know, which you could teach the chorus in 2 minutes. Okay, you can say, like there's a song called Moreno soy, porque nací de la rumba, el sabor yo heredé de guaguanco. Tell them what that chorus means.
You got it, man. You got it.
Yeah, Moreno soy, black I am, he said,
This will-
because I was born of the rumba. Now, what is he saying about the rumba? Rumba is a Spanish word, but he's implying that it's pointing to a black aesthetic. The essence of rumba is the call and response. He says, Nací de la rumba, el sabor yo heredé. The soul, the spirit that I inherited comes from the guaguancó. Guaguancó is it. Boom, 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 boom. That's the guaguancó. If you hear Latin music, you hear that in the background all the time. Doom, 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 ba, 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 boom, boom, boom. Well, then he's singing. He says, Moreno soy. And notice the word moreno, which in Spanish, it doesn't mean black, it means brown. He doesn't say negro soy. Moreno in Spanish can be from real tan down to trigueñito, almost knocking on the door black. So you got words, and so when you put it in, that's another thing. When you use words in song, there's a whole a different significance. For instance, why does he say that I inherited the guaguancó? I inherited blackness. But it's an imaginary blackness. It's not blackness like a boundary or a country. Meaning, I could meet you from Venezuela and you got the guaguancó in you. You may be poor as dirt. You may be in a white section, and it goes beyond skin color. You could be very light in color and have that sabor. Because if you've been Africanized, if you grew up around a lot of African playing drummers, and you're very light in color, it surpasses the whiteness and lightness. And that person who's very light in color is playing the drum, and people will say, "Oh, he plays like a black drummer." No, he's been Africanized. I was trying to think, getting into the aesthetic. Okay, what is his aesthetic? Is his aesthetic white or black? You got to go deeper into this person who has blonde hair and blue eyes playing the guaguancó. He grew up in Matanzas, Cuba, the black section of Cuba. He doesn't even know anything about white. So when you start to do research, you really got to ask yourself, you know, you're definitely going to look at color, but you also have to really get the aesthetic component of culture. You know, I hope that thing about the call and response, one part fixed, the other part open-ended. That's why if you go to a church service, you notice how the same singer changes a lot of times they use the same word, but they put it in at the end instead of the beginning. So you learning and you're creating while you're learning the fundamentals of the black aesthetic, you are creating. So your development is not just like in K through 12, the European system, okay, you just shut up, here you do this. Then at the 12th grade, they can say, we'll see okay, I don't know what you think, but just take this test. So you go all this time just following instructions. In the African-based cultures, the person is developing his own way of thinking and a solo style.
Can I ask you a question, Fatih?
Yeah.
Would you consider the African American musical production, compositional production, to be an African based
I think
in the same way that, let us say, Dominican Republic or Cuba?
what I see, I think because, and I deduced it to because the drum was banned, that the aesthetic was there, but it played itself out on the European instruments. That's why when you listen to like a lot of African American musicians, you hear it in the piano a lot. where you hear 4 or 5 lines going. See, in traditional African music and African music, everybody's playing one rhythm. Like somebody be playing the clave, somebody playing the maraca, somebody playing the drum. In the Black American culture, the one musician is playing, he's the whole band.
You mean on the piano?
Yeah, particularly the piano. You see, when you get people like Duke, what he did, he put 5 and 6 different musicians together playing the same harmony, but they got a different rhythmic mode going on here. So here you got the composer. He evidently heard that. So some people in European music call it polyphony, a polyphonic component. It means when you got 5 and 6 different lines, that's typical in West African drumming. So in European music, it's a high level of consciousness. In African culture, it's the beginning. Polyphony. You know, hearing, it's just that different individuals are playing the different parts.
You know, because if I could just ask you another question, one of the things when you look at Ellington, this desire to create symphonic music, even his songs have that symphonic, like Blue Mood Indigo. So that's why I was asking, do you consider the African American, let us say Ellington or Mingus or Charlie Parker?
Well,
do you consider them to be in the African mode, or is it different from that?
Well, see, the way I see it, different African American musicians act out the Africanness or aesthetic in a different way. Charlie Parker was always solo. He was always jam section. See, what Duke did, I think, if you think forward, and this happened to me when I started my group, like, how do you have a rehearsal and not spend 5 days trying to get through a piece? So Duke would give you a little blueprint so everybody could play together. Also, it gives you a sense of power when you see, if I have a big band, it's an extension of my power. Like, I can't play all that stuff. You know, like you said about, you talked about Mahler. See, the European culture, if you look back pre-technology, the whole idea of the symphony, because imagine the order, you go in the concert hall and you hear like a 75 string versus 1.
Yeah.
You know, now, like when you hear Duke, see what also, it encourages the music to collaborate. Like, say if I want to build a city or build a community, you got to get people to understand that everybody has a different role. So if you look at the motives of Parker or even Mingus or any of these musicians, was the motive all encompassing? Was that more than just music?
It was what?
More than just music.
Yes.
See, that's really what you're
That's what I
saying.
want to ask you this, if you don't mind me just, and the others could, kick into, first of all of these instruments often throwaway. The saxophone was not a major instrument in European symphonic music. They took it, it's a major instrument. The trumpet was not, they took it and made it. So I'm saying the experience, the existential question of them taking European instruments to produce an African American.
But that's actually what happened. It gets back to, see, the aesthetics get
Which is,
into
if it
timbre.
were just the drum,
Yeah.
you see, the originary of that's African, they play drums and so on and so. But now you have, well, the piano definitely, but then a saxophone, a clarinet.
Well, if you look at that, then notice the way he used those instruments, particularly the reed instrument, you get that wah, 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 wah sound. Yeah, that's not, that aesthetic is not European. See, that's if you look at they would kick you out of the temple. If you came in with trumpet, wah, 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 that was the essence of Louis Armstrong. You know how, matter of fact, you know how Louis' cheeks would go out like that?
No, that's Dizzy. Dizzy Gillespie.
Okay, how about okay.
Yeah, but I don't, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but you know what I mean? Aesthetically, it doesn't look beautiful.
No, it doesn't.
But to who?
Absolutely.
See, really what it gets into, I think we're always trying to do, what we are trying to do with young people, to accept the aesthetic, the dimensions of your own aesthetic, and don't look at it to be ugly because it is not the way that it is not based on Eurocentricity. For instance, see the whole thing about what I see African American music is a battle between the dance and the song. For instance, when you hear Nina sing Diana Washington, the idea of the lamentation,
Right.
the lyrical, and then next thing you know, that same person, like it goes from one extreme to the other. See, the idea of the lamenting song.
Let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. I can understand in Cuban, the Cuban drummer, the Cuban musician, of situating himself in the African, that is his tradition. But then you get the African American who situates himself or herself in the struggle for freedom. Isn't that a difference? That's why I'm asking, is there Michelle, is there an epistemic break with both the European and the African?
Yeah,
from a philosophical worldview, and then they fit the music, they adapt the music to their worldview and to the purpose of their music.
Well, see, now that's another thing. That's a very important question when you do
Let me just go
research.
to the back.
Is it generated out of a worldview, or is it something that the person grows up? Say you're born, you start hearing music, and just something turns you on. See what happens, and I know because when you talk to musicians, for instance, I was always stimulated by drumming. I started out playing percussion. And when I went on the piano, I thought about melodicizing a drum beat. So then when I started looking at the development of African American music, he's hearing the beat, but also they have a concept called rubato in European music, where like you slow down and you speed up. Where in African American music, you always have a steady pulse, but you find it in the upper voices where the singer will be crossing the line like, my baby loved me and left me, but the beat is going like this, and this is just you hear it in the blues. Now Duke brought that in his aesthetic with his winds, where it's like they're talking without words. So the winds are actually talking, but it's a song without words. And that idea of not just like da 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 dee da da dee da, like you hear the melody is bouncing around randomly, but you got this pulse. And I think that when you deal with the African aesthetic or the Black aesthetic, you have to look past the instrument, and like any instrument could be playing a rhythm. You just when I said the drum was taken away, but the drum beats weren't taken. That's why, and you see it, like if you look at African American dance, all Black dances have something in common. This comes out of dance research. The head and the hip move the same direction, and the arms and the feet. Yeah.
Can I just say, I think, I guess part of this is getting into questions that, because some of us have been reading Blues People by Amiri Baraka, and his kind of thesis is that through the music of Black America, you have a sense of what happens to the consciousness of Black America and how it develops through the struggle for freedom. And his argument is that, yes, there is an African root to Black music, but that in many ways, what it becomes is the product of, in some ways, the collision between Europe and Africa in the minds of the slaves, and then in the minds of the freedmen, in which it's like the music emerges out of the struggle to like almost grapple with this collision of civilizations in the minds and in the souls of Black folk. And I think this is, in some ways, I feel like a lot of what I'm getting out of the conversation is we're trying to identify where is the battleground in the music? Like where is the battle to be waged? And where do you have to go in order to actually find the location of that battleground? Like what is there to be fought over when it comes to the music? And I think that gets the question that you raised of like, okay, what's black about the music? But also the question of, okay, what's revolutionary about the music? What makes the music revolutionary to begin with? And I just wanted to read part of what Crystal had brought up earlier, which is Mingus's essay, "What is a Jazz Composer?" Which actually he won a Grammy. So these were supposed to be the liner notes for his album "Let My Children Hear Music." He won a Grammy for the liner notes, but not for the album itself. Which I think is very ironic. Like I didn't even know you could win a Grammy for the liner notes of an album. But he says, had I been born in a different country, or had I been born white, I'm sure that I would have been able to express my ideas a long time ago. Maybe they wouldn't have been as good, because when people are born free, I can't imagine it. But I've got a feeling that if it's so easy for you, the struggle and the initiative are not as strong as they are for a person who has to struggle and therefore has more to say. And like Mingus is saying that like the struggle creates new qualities for the music. It gives new meaning to the music, and that the music has much more to say because it comes out of this struggle for freedom, whereas like what we call white music doesn't have as much to say because it doesn't have to struggle as much against something. And I feel like this is part of the question of like, is there something distinct about even African American music, even in this kind of broader panorama of the Americas, of basically African peoples who come to the Americas, but specifically I feel like what we're interested in, especially for this symposium, is African American music. And he has the other, actually I won't read it, but the other kinds of things that he's saying about jazz and what it means to be a jazz composer is that he's saying that essentially jazz creates the possibility for each artist to be a composer. But it's that means that it creates a kind of responsibility for each artist in which you have to like actually take responsibility for like composing the music as you're playing. And then he also talks about other stuff, like basically he's like attacking like pop music at the time, and he's saying that he's like, when you look at the Beatles, it's so clear to me that they're basically just copying black music, but they're not being upfront about it. And he's like, when I listen to the Beatles, I don't hear anything English in their music. All I hear is like them listening to black artists and trying to repackage it and resell it. But he's like, his whole argument in that essay is to be like, let the children hear music. Let the children hear music and not noise and not pop music. Let the children hear music, because then this is what creates a possibility for our people to flourish. But also he's like, if our children hear music, then there's no symphony in the world, there's no orchestra in the world that could deny it. But he's like who even needs these white symphonies at this point?
Say that one. Who needs?
He's like who needs these white symphonies at this point? It's like when we have all of this already, and like we're in the process of developing it. But I don't know. I just wanted to bring that up because
wow, you dropped the bomb on me, man.
Can I go through it? Because I want to build on what Jeremiah is saying, because like I feel like the key to all this is what you said, Doc, about the purpose of the symposium is to say that that the music was adapted to fit a revolutionary worldview of a people who were not free, and then there was emancipation, yet we're still not free. And what that produces is a music and a worldview for humanity. And I have to just say, I just also feel the urge to say, I really commend whatever this Cinquet orchestra did here. Like this planning, what you guys have basically worked out and then brought to free school today, because it was so damn much. So much in terms of like political thought. And it's so important because I don't think I ever took music. Honestly, I don't think I've ever taken music seriously like that, which says something about people in this country. I'm sure many people are more similar to me because of how the cognition of young people has been manipulated to not even take music seriously as a language for freedom. And the people who produce that language for freedom. Because even this thing of like, African American music, the music came out of an urge, an insatiable urge to express a worldview that cannot just be expressed through talking, but something more complex, something more full, something big as like what humanity should bust out of. And in some ways, I feel like we're really similar to that in free school, because in a lot of ways, we talked a lot about how like we're becoming more like artists. And the reason why is because it's not enough to just be a thinker. It's not enough to just be like me, but it's like we're at a point where we're grasping for new languages, new ways of fulfilling and expressing our revolutionary worldview in a time of crisis. Which is why like Jeremiah writes poetry, why suddenly I never thought I was an artist, and suddenly I'm like, we need to write a play. We need new language to express this revolutionary worldview imperative, something that needs to be said today. Which is to say that Black art is art for humanity, for freedom. And it's how Du Bois said it, going back to the very first thing you said, Doc, in your vision statement, which is Du Bois, the way he said, the spirit of Africa is all over this quote unquote new continent. That the enslaved Black proletariat forcefully, violently brought from Africa to this new continent, brought something from the first ancient mother continent to then be translated and sung and spoken for the world, saying something about humanity, something that humanity has not achieved for humanity's sake. And that's why Black music is music for all humanity, something in it that humanity must take up. Like, and it's what you were saying, like what Mingus said in that article, where in his speech, where basically he's saying, like, we don't need to listen to white symphonies, because let's take up Duke Ellington, let's take up Charles Mingus, the world. What do it mean for the world to take up Bootsy, Sun Ra, Ellington, Mingus, and there's that. Let's take up that and move it forward. White people who call themselves white should take that forward. And in fact, in some ways they already have, but because they won't admit that it comes from Black music, they pervert themselves and thus continually produce white music, even though they're taking from Black music. And yeah, there's actually so much we covered that I can't even go into.
To what you're saying.
Yeah, but just one thing.
It's actually connected with what Jeremiah said too. Talking about Amiri Baraka and the blues, more of a vocal genre, But something I noticed, and this is when I came back from the Dominican Republic, I noticed that and this also answers what Dr. Montero said. See, the resistance was always there from the beginning in performance. But what I noticed in the African American, he came to the conclusion that, look, I know that my white counterpart acts like he doesn't know what's going on, so I'm going to say it. I'm just going to put it in words. Because he acts like he doesn't know what's going on. For instance, when...
Can Emily finish, because I was listening to her train of thought?
Okay.
Yeah, the last thing I just wanted to say is that, like, the one thing I wanted to highlight of all the things is the structure of the event, especially that first day, Duke Ellington and Mingus, which is the fact that we're saying that, take Ellington, that it was everything African. That is everything African, but that it's not shirking or turning a back on European modernity, but in fact,
everything African, though not exclusively African.
Yes, they're not exclusively African.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. You go ahead.
No, because Duke Ellington, what he does is, and like I really get this actually from Du Bois and John Brown, where in fact it is Duke Ellington, that music that is everything African but not exclusively African, that actually fulfills modernity, is the beginning of fulfilling modernity, something that the sons and grandsons of those Europeans could not do, because that their ideas of the Renaissance of freedom were so corrupted because of their white supremacy that they engaged in on the new continent of America. And so in fact, it is the despised, the dark on this continent who actually then take everything African, but not exclusively African, who take up the music, and then they pick up those instruments that are European and explore new possibilities of music, new possibilities of thought, new possibilities of freedom. Something that the European, the European Renaissance we're engaging in, this idea of like, the truth does not have to come from the church. The truth comes from the ordinary human being. And that is fulfilled by people like Duke Ellington. And I also just wanted to, the actual last thing is Mingus. Honestly, I know I'm supposed to also like Sun Ra and Bootsy, but like, I just really like Charles Mingus because he is so like, honestly, he just so resonates with me. And I was telling Alice, I was like, oh my God, he's exactly like you. And he's honestly, I think every young person in society, because of how violent the society is, that everyone basically has a mental health issue. Yeah. Charles Mingus so speaks to that because he's basically like, I'm not an angry person. This society makes me so angry because I can't be compatible with this evil. And it's crazy because when you hear his song, Duke Ellington, The Sound of Love, it's almost so emotional because he's basically paying tribute to he's paying tribute. It's so sweet. And it's Mingus so like upset and angry with society paying tribute to this man who meant so much to him because he gave him a path to do something, and take responsibility with something, like to make music. And like there's this Baraka play, The Dutchman, where basically the black character in The Dutchman, Baraka's play is basically like, listen, if you want black people to stop singing, stop dancing, stop basically producing art, then you'd be asking us to be white. And if we were white, then we would have killed all you guys on the plantation during the Civil War. We would just go and we would literally just kill all white people. Is that what you want? And it's so, you hear like Mingus, like he's paying tribute to this man the way that we pay tribute to Du Bois in a lot of ways, of providing the path out for humanity, where Mingus is like, let me do something with this. And that is a revolutionary message for young people today to refine.
Well, because I've been also reading the autobiography by Mingus, and like I'm only in the first 2 chapters, but he talks about, like, he was like basically almost lynched when he was a kid.
Almost what?
Because he was with that girl.
Yeah, he was almost lynched when he was a kid. And it's because like he had like a crush on this white girl, and then she had a crush on him, and then like her brothers or something or someone else.
Property.
Yeah, like basically they tried to lynch him, and then he was saved by 2 older black guys. And I feel like the other thing that Mingus brings up in the essay that I wanted to mention is that he says that he's like, the unique possibility that jazz has opened up creates this phenomenon where European musicians, when they come to America, this is the music that they want to play because they find possibilities in jazz which are close to them in the European tradition. And it's like, that's why you have all these European artists who are flocking to black music because it opens up a possibility for them which is not available in the European landscape. And the other thing I want to bring up also with Du Bois is that in a lot of ways, actually, this is why I see the Music Symposium and the Knowledge Conference as being very complementary, because Du Bois makes a point in Souls of Black Folk. He's like, when you look at Fisk University, he's like, the music is what built Fisk University. He talks about the Jubilee singers and how they raised funds, but like he's not saying it in even like a literal way, but in a metaphorical way. It's like music built this college, music built this black college, and music created the possibility for black people to seek knowledge for freedom. And I think this is like, in some ways, these are, I guess, the running themes throughout the 2 conferences. But I think this is also, it gets to the question of like, what is it that makes music and art revolutionary? Is not like, you have this whole notion that art merely reflects the social condition of people, or art merely is kind of a reflection of an existing social order. But what Du Bois is saying is that yes, art can be a reflection of a social order or social condition, but that art is also it's like, art is that thing that pushes people, it motivates people to struggle. And it's like, even what Michelle brought up of like, how is it possible for the slaves to know where to go during the general strike. And like, I think it is basically music. It's like the songs, like, for instance, like the songs of the Underground Railroad, right? It's like those were not just like a reflection of something, but it's like literally through the music,
Direction.
the slaves develop a sense of like where we want to go, what's freedom mean? Where do we have to, when we leave the plantation, where do we have to go? And like all these metaphors. And it's like, in that sense, music is not just, like a reflection of something, but it also is like what you said in the vision statement, like it is the advanced guard of the struggle itself. And in that sense, it's not something which is behind the struggle, but is at the forefront and the leading edge of the struggle. I think this is something which, like basically our entire generation has not been taught. And like these are the kinds of ideas and lessons that we're trying to bring back into the conversation.
Can I add? I wanted to add to what Jeremiah was saying, because first of all, I wanted to say that the vision statement was really, I think it's very powerful, because I think front and center, it puts exactly what this is what I was thinking about. It puts front and center this idea that this music, or even that statement from Du Bois, that this is the narrative, it's a rhythmic narrative of a disappointed people, the weight that the statement carries, and the fact that it needs to be understood. It's not just a throwaway thing, or a passive description of something, where from the vision statement, it becomes very clear that you see this music not as just a passive byproduct of a history of a people, like, oh, at this stage, this is what was produced, and so on. It's very much an active driving force of the struggle itself. And I think I also really appreciated the way you put, and all of you, what you were saying, Duke Ellington and Du Bois together, and Ellington's music being a companion, in fact, of that new movement of world thought that Du Bois started. Because, like, even this question, Michelle, you were bringing up, why music? Like, why does it need music, And it reminded me of when we were talking about Du Bois as the originary figure of a new movement of world thought, what he himself thought would be required to take forward human knowledge was that it's going to need more than science, it's going to need art, it's going to need an imaginary. Because if you describe the project of modernity, or completing the project of modernity, as essentially the question of, okay, like, what, broadly speaking, what is the possibility of human life? Like, what of love, of beauty, of freedom can the human being claim for himself from this world? And more importantly, what could be the purpose that a human being lives for? This is the breadth of the question that Du Bois is trying to deal with. And it the same, and from today's discussion, it also becomes clear that this is also the realm of questioning that this music is trying to deal with. And then you think about,
Do that one more time, the realm of question.
like, when I try to articulate for myself, what is this project? What is the completion of modernity? What are the questions that it puts on the table? I mean, this is not a complete answer, but the way I think about it is, it really tries to understand the possibilities for a human life, and like how much freedom can be broadened, how much the idea or the ideal of beauty can be broadened, but also to give a purpose or meaning, or what you put as the moral or revolutionary imperative, as undergirding life for the human being. Like, you're not just here floating around, working for a certain number of years in your life and then dying at the end of it. There is a purpose. There is something that you're on this. And I think Baldwin talks about it in his essay of the Sorrow Song, that the question always that the European modernity could never answer was this question of, who am I and what am I doing here? And to answer these questions, what Du Bois is saying, you can't just have science, because it's not going to be answered by looking for laws of human development or human relationships or economics and this and that. It also requires an imaginary. It requires something that captures the moral and spiritual strivings of human beings. And this is also why, like, it's just like, this is a very simple thing to say, but this is also why the Black freedom struggle was not just in the realm of politics. It also required this artistic revolution, which is what we are celebrating in this conference. And even what you said about aesthetic, I think I've always had like a negative relationship with this word because I feel like too much in popular culture right now misinterprets the idea of the aesthetic as something that's superficial or about the form. But what you're talking about here about Ellington's aesthetic with Mood Indigo is about the substance of beauty, not the form of beauty. And just to say that this is not something that can be captured by the rational scientific realm of knowledge or questioning. It requires the artistic or the creative, what you said. And I think I've just forgotten all the other stuff that I wanted. Oh yeah, the only other thing that I remember now is also it was significant to me that somewhere in the vision statement you also say that all of this was seen as threatening, and that has like for me, for our generation, that answers the question of why this music did not pass on to us. Like that, why was there that counter revolution that killed this development or killed this historical movement forward and replaced it with something like hip hop? And I was thinking about why it was this threatening, and I think that's where what we have said about the knowledge conference, but also the music conference, as really centering certain civilizational questions become important because it's a civilizational threat. The completion of modernity, this reach for a new kind of human being, a new man and woman, new ways of even men and women, the romantic ideal, new ways of men and women to love, to raise their children and so on. It's in direct opposition to the vision of civilization that the white world has laid out in front of the world throughout history as the only way, the only thing to aspire to. So, I mean, it is threatening when you like confront the truth of this music or the truth of the Black freedom struggle, because it clearly shows you and everything that you guys were also reading out. Why do you even need white music? Why do you need white symphonies anymore? You have to actually contend with those questions when you come face to face with something that is so true.
I just want to add to that of something that the preschool has encouraged me to do that I wasn't thinking that way, was see when musicians talk about being original and like say you get together with African Americans and they all play R&B, say they play funk, say they play jazz, they'll develop a certain language and they won't, and the politics never have anything to do with it. Now, suppose I am a entrepreneur or organizer and I want to have an event like you're happening, like say Dr. Montero wants to go and encourage musicians to be aware of their Blackness and that why don't you present your thing at the symposium? Well, I'm just being me. So how do you teach a person who thinks that he's just being himself to think that he belongs to a group? Because when you start talking about Blackness, when you bring in the element of politics, you see, after talking to him, I would have students coming to me saying they want to learn how to play. Sometimes I feel a mother's child. I want you to walk with me. In the beginning, by me not being such a religious person, I said, "Oh, don't bring me any hymns, don't do this." But when I looked at him, that was just what reaching out to his Blackness. So if I'm a good teacher, and this what we can all do, like say you meet people and they're into K-pop, that Korean rock music, or somebody's into rap. Maybe we don't have to kick them to the curb. We could just let them rattle, and then ask them, well, what do you mean you want to express yourself? Do you feel that you have an obligation to your group?
Fakti, I'm hearing you, and you are always concerned with the pedagogy, knowing you as I do. However, there's something that precedes pedagogy.
Oh, definitely.
And so, and I think that what we're struggling for is that what Kant would call that a priori, that transcendental realm that precedes pedagogy, where
like a world view,
and exactly. But see, a choice, a moral choice, that has to be made, and a moral responsibility of the musician, of the composer, of the intellectual. And so, I know in our conversations, we don't feel so embracing of musicians. I know I feel they're lazy, morally irresponsible, and just trying to get paid. Yeah. And they have to live, but there is so much missing and so much, that's what I'm going to say. What precedes pedagogy? And why must there be something that precedes it? I mean, teach what? And what is the moral choice made by the teacher?
Yeah, but see, when I say, to me, if I just could, like, say I meet somebody who plays R&B and they want to play with that jazz group, I'll just say, well, what is your concept of music? So it's not a classroom thing.
No, I understand.
Well, so the question is, does the Black activist,
yes,
is he legitimate in that he can judge the musician who doesn't express that?
And see, this is
that
really see, we're trying, and I'll just shut my mouth.
Oh, no.
We see ourselves in relationship to a huge ideological, political battle at this time in history. Well, will we change the world? Maybe not, maybe so. We don't know. But, that's what
but I understand that.
Yeah. And so.
I understand it clearly.
And so the depravity, the emptiness of the intellectual, the academic, the musician, they're empty and frivolous compositions. They're concessions to a popular corporate culture, and they say nothing. You understand?
Basically, you're talking about pop.
No, I'm talking about the jazz musicians.
And here's where the dilemma is.
No, we could turn over to other people.
No, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that.
I want to say, in the beginning, I heard you talk about, you said Charlie Mingus, the overt conditions they were responding to. Today's musician is not responding to those same conditions. Therefore, their view of the world, because your view of the world is affected by the conditions you have. And so I'm listening to what we're talking about, and like today's musicians haven't fulfilled our dream of how Martin Luther King saw the world. They have co-opted and have accepted whiteness. And that is concretely expressed in P. Diddy. It's concretely, I mean, that's if you look at music, like what you're talking about Charlie Mingus. He was expressing his anger. You're talking about Sun Ra, going up to space and not. But look at the rap artists today. What are they talking? My point is simply that they're affected by the actual living conditions of the day, and that's why they.
So you say that to say what?
I say that to say that that's a reason for them being that way, but doesn't justify it. They need to see what you're talking about here in order to make that change. In other words, for example, what P. Diddy and all that, the contradictions are beginning to show that they're not for Black people. I mean, this is actually what people say.
Well, we didn't need him to go to jail to real. No. Let me say this. I think this is very important. Every Ellington and Fletcher Henderson, all of them could have said the conditions are such.
Right.
Take Ellington. The beginning of the people don't read. Most of us were. They could have said, look at the conditions. Therefore, I'm not going to do very much of anything. I don't.
I'm not saying
that's what you are saying.
No, I'm not. Okay. I'm saying that the conditions that they lived in, they had to struggle. They didn't have all these opportunities.
But you don't think we have to struggle now?
Yes, we have to struggle because what the vision that King and Malcolm X was fighting for, the musician today has put it aside. And what you're doing today, what we're doing today is bringing that up, trying to make it better.
Yeah, but see, I disagree with you doing, and I'll just
Go ahead.
listen.
Go ahead.
No, there's always conditions to be moral. There's never a justification to be amoral or immoral. And that's what we've been talking about, the moral choice. Which connect. See, we can't find like the argument for gangster rap. Oh, they don't know no better. Oh, they didn't have music classes in school. You understand what I'm saying? Well, Johnny Hodges ain't had no music class.
I got it.
But there's always a quote plausible excuse to say the oppressed shouldn't fight against the oppressor because the oppressor. Okay, you say you're not saying that. But
you always want to fight, but you have.
But you're finding a reason not to fight.
Look, I'm not saying that. You have to remember that the conditions are different. All I'm saying is that when Ellington was playing, he couldn't play at different places, or he couldn't do certain things, or like they didn't have the music, they didn't have the, they weren't making that money. Whatever, all of those are factors that come into play. And because of those factors, you become co-opted. You no longer want to struggle. Suffering makes you struggle. That's my point. Suffering makes you struggle. And that's true. Suffering makes you struggle. So the less suffering you have, the less struggle you do. You know, that's always the case.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No, you finish your point.
Well, I guess that, and so what I'm saying is when we talk about Mingus and them, they were in those overt conditions which made us struggle more. And when you give a people money, when you give them things, and I mean, this is just a human condition. It happens to immigrants who come here, unless they become aware. And what you have here is awareness. And you have a vision. That's what you have here. You have a vision, and that vision makes your consciousness higher. You see your clarity is better. In other words, when you're living in it, you don't really see it.
A result of exposure
But
to this.
but this exposure, what I'm saying, you are talking about why these people aren't revolutionary. And I agree with that. I see what you're doing. And they need to be exposed to this conference to see how they're lacking.
Well, let Alice come on in.
Well, I think what you're arguing essentially is
Speak a
that
little bit.
I think what you're arguing is that essentially that the conditions of oppression are less severe today than the time of Mingus. I don't think that question, well, one is that in preschool we've been talking about how actually the crisis in America is deepening, where obviously you're not going to have the same way in which Mingus was going to be lynched as a kid, but the same question resides, which is that Black children growing up in this country, or even children growing up in this country, are dying, both physically and mentally. And for a musician, and I think what we're saying also here is that it's not just the P. Diddy's or the rappers, it's also the musicians of Philadelphia that are playing this music that aren't recognizing their responsibility.
I agree.
And I think that's what we're trying to get to. Because, let me finish. And the thing is, if you look at a city like Philadelphia, during the summertime, you have young children that are riding bikes and playing rap. But the question that we've asked is that, what if the whole city of Philadelphia were playing this music? How does it change our children to listen to this music growing up? And I don't think we're, okay, I listen to that. I'm not disagreeing with it. But I think what we're disagreeing on is that there isn't this music that's being, or people and individuals, not just artists, and it's not even just artists as a secluded category of society, What we're saying is that the artist should be a revolutionary, and a revolutionary should be an artist. And I'm not just saying this to you, but.
So the preschool thing.
I don't even.
Yes,
Okay,
and I'm not saying
that's
this
clear.
just to.
No, that's clear.
And I'm not disagreeing with them. They are, yeah.
Yeah, but what is your point?
My
See,
point
your
is.
point is that the conditions are not right for another.
No, not.
Yes, wait a minute, hold it.
Go ahead.
You are, see, you can't, like Malcolm said, make it clear. You were saying that you have to understand the conditions to explain the type of music that we have today and why we will not produce a Mingus. That is your argument.
No, I'm not saying that's right. No, I'm not saying.
Are you sure Mingus didn't already?
I'm not saying.
Because y'all talking about.
I'm not saying that.
Y'all talking about P. Diddy and all. Those are people that corporations have put before y'all. They have access to be able to push it. So you're making the assumption that there is no artist out there that's producing music that isn't like, because the artist, they're probably not going to be motivated by the same things that P. Diddy or 50 Cent is motivated by, being seen, having, getting capital, being on at the Super Bowl, singing or whatever. And so if they're not motivated by those things, you might not see them. It doesn't mean that isn't happening. It's just that corporations, we live in a corporation, basically, and that corporation is broadcasting to the whole population.
Well, that is it, but isn't that what we're getting at?
Right.
And this is why when we talk about cognitive, cultural, and moral manipulation,
right,
by this huge corporate machine that has a direct interest in. Oh, you saying what I'm saying?
And I'm saying, and that affects their worldview.
Yeah, we do. I mean, we done said this over and over again. But my point is the magnitude. Well, first of all, if we all know this, why aren't we all standing up for the alternative to it?
All of us don't know.
Say what?
All of us don't know.
I mean, let's say that that those in this room, or those around this room, if this is common knowledge among a significant group of people that the music ain't worth a dime, that it's manipulated by corporate America. Okay, that doesn't take rocket science to know. And if you say that this music is manipulating the behavior of young people, especially young Black males, then we say, okay, we have an alternative tradition. And this is what we ask how is this a relevant tradition? Can it be applied to this time? That's what we're trying to work out. And this thing of, well, suffering produces struggle. So somebody said, well, hey, there's a lot of suffering out here and we don't see a lot of struggle.
Well, you know things that.
So I know, what do I know?
You know things have changed since the time.
Well, hold it. Change, but things can change and remain in substance the same.
Yes, they can.
I mean, what is this thing of things have changed? So, I mean, okay, go y'all. See, you ain't going nowhere with this.
Oh, yes, I am.
We know.
Here's where I'm going. I'm saying that they need this consciousness that you're talking about now to make the movement be like Martin Luther King, the revolution of values. Our values are not revolutionary now. Why? Because we haven't finished the dream. And so what you're talking about now here is making people aware. People have to be conscious of what you're talking about. They're sleeping. All the young people are sleeping. They believe in P. Diddy and they want to be rap artists. They're sleeping. And so you have to wake them up. Right? You have to do what you're doing here now.
Okay, go ahead, Samir.
Maybe I can explain the disagreement by saying I think that you guys are referring to the fact that the ideological struggle and the material struggle are related, the fact that ideologically, the music in the youth culture has a material impact. You know, there wouldn't be so much pain for people. But more importantly, I wanted to get to something Serafina said a little bit back, where you can't have nihilism in an aesthetic tradition. You know, from what I've learned about art in preschool, and I'm not an art guy, you guys have taken it to another level. An aesthetic tradition has to come from somewhere. There are, you know, I was thinking about this while you guys were speaking of, is there an aesthetic tradition that believes in nothing? No, by definition, a tradition is handed down. And so, and this, I'll relate this politically to the academy and intellectuals, and maybe to what you're saying is, there is an ideological tendency today to look back in history with pessimism or nihilism. And you know, politically, we've seen that with the Enlightenment revolutions and the European revolutions, where you have people like Gerald Horne saying the American Revolution wasn't worth anything. There's no revolutionary potential in America. And people, you know, in the academy, this is where I want to go to. The French Revolution in particular, particularly, you know, you started off, and you actually, I was thinking about this because that young man said, you guys hold postmodernism in a lot of contempt, and he was trying to figure it out. And we do hold postmodernism in a lot of contempt. And that's because of, you know, from, this is how I explain it, the way that postmodernists view the French Revolution is that it was a failure, and that, you know, it's a, you know, it's just a garbage bin of history. You know, it didn't mean anything. And you know, I disagree with that because I'm a humanist. And you know, this is where we've been talking about humanism in a sort of different language. But you know, with all its flaws, that the French Revolution was a progressive event, was a good thing, and I wouldn't give it back for anything, along with the American Revolution. And so I think we've got to the point where intellectuals and artists are so reactionary that they'd give the French Revolution back, that they'd give the values that the people want. You know, and that's where I'll end, because, you know, I don't know your name, but you made that point about, you know, maybe we don't see people presented as entertainers with these sorts of values. But you know, I think Bati, you brought it up, that this is folk, this is the values of the folk, and you know, have the folk given up the struggle? You know, maybe young people that we see in the streets, they might not have you know, the revolutionary values that we're talking about them, but are they visible to us? How many of you people, you know, I'm not that much older than Gen Z, but how many people see young people on a daily basis and know what they're into?
So, and I would also say, it is, the thing that I would say is different is the ability to, or the powers of the corporations of today, that you have influence in to be able to push out a message overall that impacts everybody. Whereas before, it was like, you're sort of like, just, you know, everybody in your town, you know, everybody around you, so it's more organic. Now, everything isn't so organic, but those things could still be happening, but it might be a mistake to compare, you know, Duke Ellington to P. Diddy, because they're not even the same people. They're not even like, you know, sorry.
You know what I noticed over the years, and this is connected with where the preschool is. I could meet someone, okay, you say you just want to play salsa and rap, but they meet someone like the doctor and, or the over a period of years, they say, oh, you know, I realized that this drum I'm playing is of African descent. I thought it was from Spain. In other words, that awareness with some people is so subtle, you would think, well, common sense would tell you that, I think what my colleague is saying here is that, particularly you still have contact with non-thinking people, you know, like, rather than to kick them to the curb, as soon as you meet them, listen, you say, oh my, that poor boy. But then do I sit and listen? Now, by me, I'm private students, okay, signs up, little by little, since the focus is on building skills, then little by little, I'll give him the language where he can start to assess And then but only because I've been consistently involved in teaching young people, and not public school. Most of my schools are private. So I think what you're saying is, see, when you're dealing with people, the folks, okay, the folk is the urban folk, whole different breed. Okay, they're consumed with things. Okay, if you believe from the older school, okay, we have more rational thinking, but do you start where they are, or do you hear and say, look, you need to get rid of that rap, or do you bring them from this lack of consciousness into consciousness, and then do you have the patience to do it? You know, how do you do it? Or do you take the position, look, here's common sense tells you, logical thinking says that stuff is garbage. Then where does the dialogue begin? And see, it really gets back to language. Many times, particularly musicians, I know they'll say something like this one musician, he said, oh, I'm in the music. I said, what do you do? Well, I'm in the beats. Now that's that repertoire. Now I could walk away from it or say, what do you mean by beats? I use that Socratically. I mean beats. I said, you mean you play with a hand? No, I use a machine. Also for you, making beats is electric. In other words, I'll get into that dialogue. Oh, you know, that beat, I want to be a producer. It was this illogical thinking. As intellectuals here, I think the question is, do you find other people that come right in and they can fit right in, or are you willing to kind of gradually bring them up or leave them, put them someplace else and let them gradually work their way into the free school? Like, I see the free school is kind of like a graduate school. No, a graduate thinking in that you take an intellectual position, and if you want to, somebody wants to come in, they got to at least show where they are. Can you think logically? Well, I can't read and write. Well, you better go back to Bronx from school, then come see us next year. I mean, sometimes I think people come in, and what's your name? Dwight will say that way, and it can be misinterpreted. When I could feel it deep down inside, you get this hopeless person, he needs this. What he's saying is he's pro this school, but what do we do with people that seem to be so lost? You know? Yeah. And I go through it all the time. The only reason I keep bringing up Latin America's concept, aesthetic of blackness, and not because I know when I first went to Dominican Republic, I thought they knew they were black. I had no idea they thought they were from Spain. And I would say, well, logically, if you got an Afro like you don't you see? Oh no, but my father comes from Galicia. My grandfather from Galicia, and he's got an Afro, and then he's darker than I am. And it dawned on me, I said, oh, he asked. I said, no. I said in 2000, whatever it was. So I didn't understand the magnitude of that type of ignorance of self-awareness. So I started to travel, and I'm saying, you're playing this drum, and you have no idea. But then you had certain intellectuals that would little by little work with the young people, start community schools and bring them out of it, you want to call it whatever. Bring them out of this ignorance, but not condemn them for being ignorant in the sense of not knowing. You know. So I don't want to, I think it's clear that we definitely see the value in terms of building an intelligentsia here. And I don't mean a non-functioning, I mean a functional intelligentsia. A lot of you teach, you know.
Well, yeah, I just want to, I liked actually the conversation that was emerging from over here about basically this thing about, I feel like the key, like in terms of, because essentially what you were raising is there's a lot of young people who want to be artists with integrity. Yeah. And, but the thing is I feel like this corporate machination that we don't even know how large and how deep it goes, is that the most dangerous thing it did, even more than even Duke Ellington's time and Mingus's time, is that it has successfully, I do think it has successfully infiltrated into our cognition, the way we even approach what we think is music.
Right.
Like, I do think in some ways, I mean, I know I'm not the only one. I know that the way we're trained to even see music is to think that it doesn't have to have meaning.
Right.
Like, music to art does not have to have meaning. We expect so little of music, we expect so little of art because we expect so little of ourselves. And we expect so little of our own lives. And we expect so little of the world. And I think that's why in a lot of ways we've been conditioned. I do think we've been conditioned without knowing we've been conditioned by external forces because it also has not been challenged successfully. Those forces have not been challenged with what we're doing here is because people don't, if your understanding of even what to demand of music and what to demand of our own lives is so low, then it does affect like people who like young, like children who are artists, basically artists who have a worldview to express, have something they want to express, but then their path to expressing it is basically not encouraged. In fact, it's a lot of it is stamped down. Or you do see celebrities and think maybe actually art and music is not, maybe I can abandon the worldview and just pursue the music without a worldview or without a stance. When actually I do think like young people, no matter where you come from, like have it in them, are seeking to say something. And the music and the art can be a way to say that thing. But the thing is that there also has to be like, you have to understand that music is an expression of a revolutionary striving, or even this human striving that we deserve to have life, and we deserve to have music, and we deserve to have a future. And music is an expression of that fight for a future. But yeah, that's why I've always liked that phrase of we've been cognitively, morally, politically manipulated to expect so little of music because we expect so little of ourselves. We expect so little of each other. And I feel like, and I do think you see that in different ways with different people across like America, even Philly. Like you see like children kind of give up because they're also not shown like basically people like Mingus, it was the opposite. That's why like Duke meant so much to him. It was the opposite. I have something to fight against, and I have something to say against this white supremacist social system. And yeah, and I think like actually it was explained so well, this thing of like when I heard this whole conversation explained why. Actually, I like the word you use, organic versus inorganic. What's so dangerous about today is that there's an inorganic element that we don't even sometimes clock as being inorganic. And so in some ways it's a synthetic criteria of Black, synthetic criteria of revolutionary or radical. Like we're taught that Black Panther, the movie, is as radical as you can get. Like, well, right? And it's not. Like, what is your definition of Black? What is your definition of radical?
Wait, I wanted to add to that because I agree that this is an important question. Are we saying that like this thing of, oh, P. Diddy, is his own class, but there may be a whole group of artists who are trying to at least follow in this tradition and so on. And I feel very strongly what Emily was also saying. And I think this is also why something you guys, the back and forth between you and Michelle, it was in the vision statement also. This idea of collective virtuosity. I think that's, if I'm getting that right, the idea being that these figures that are being highlighted, of course, they're legends and they're giants and revolutionaries in themselves, but they represent more than just individuals who were able to reach a high level of consciousness. They represent what was possible or what could be produced from a whole people and their struggle. And this is why, the question of, this is not a question of whether individuals can break through, even in this moment, and in this small sphere, produce great art or produce art with a vision and so on. It is really a question of what is the vision of art? What is the vision of music that we are even allowed to imagine in our time? And this idea of collective virtuosity, I think it clarified something for me, where what we are saying is in that time, and I think Doc, you've talked about this a lot, about how as part of a movement, I mean, there's a movement which has like set goals in terms of, rights or whatever, but it has a goal to move consciousness and to move knowledge towards a higher stage. And I think I'm losing my train of thought, but what I'm trying to say is this idea of collective virtuosity explained to me that a whole people were moving towards a certain place. They were carrying forward a revolutionary imperative as a people, of which I think Duke Ellington, Charlie Mingus, Ra and Bootsy stand as archetypes. That you can look up to. But the problem today being is that there isn't that collective drive or that collective vision of even a future that you would need to define what is the criteria for art today. So it's not really, that's basically what I want to say. Like individual examples will not suffice. I think this is why this music symposium is an intervention, but it's not an academic intervention. It's not just to go back into this history and say, oh, do what Duke did, or do what Mingus did, or do what Sandra did. It's a moral intervention, which places a demand on all Americans to take their history seriously and to take the fact that life is supposed to be more than we are, allowed to even imagine.
The best way I can interject into this is because I'm like obviously spinning on like so many wheels right now, but like I've been really into Donny Hathaway this week, and I don't know where I saw, but so he's diagnosed schizophrenic like at the last 5 or 10 years of his life, and he committed suicide. Like he jumped out the window, and it's kind of like crazy to think about, considering the nature from where any of us have kind of been, and meaning like the young people at the table. I don't know about Doc, but like what I mean is something about, I know damn well that Donny Hathaway was not schizophrenic. Like it's like this society is schizophrenic as ever, and there was no way for like, or even if he was, I'm not gonna dismiss, mental illness or health issues, spiritual issues, and things like that. But I do know the price of the music and of the commitment, and I know, or at least I can feel from if you study, listen, meditate with any of these people, Donnie, Marvin, the day, the pain, the feeling, the what they're talking about. Where does the song come from or whatever, right? And basically, the reason why I say it now is because, I'm a so-called artist at this table. And, part of the reason why I'm at this table is because I knew that despite technical or even commercial capabilities, I had assumed that, the meaning had to be there, the purpose had to be right. That was just the thing that I felt I needed to know. But I only bring that up because what you're saying, Emily, it's very much of a, like, on the one hand, there's so much that we see while we discuss even this event and what we've known so much by studying Du Bois, or what you can know if you strive to know. But on the same time, this thing about schizophrenia, like to be able to see what the future can be, or to struggle for the future, regardless of where.
May I ask you a question? Just, are you saying therefore, rather than schizophrenia, we should look at severe depression brought on by a social system that did not offer him a place for his heart, for his humanity? Is that a fair?
And the spiritual.
I mean, is that fair? Is that what you're getting at?
I would say so.
Okay.
And the reason why I bring that up is because there is that spiritual crisis that, to be an artist becomes a heavy lifting.
A disability for your own well-being at times. In fact, You know, the reason I say, because this is what we were experiencing when we were studying. We had to deal with this very thing, the crisis of the Black artists at that time, where they all should have been driven mad. It would have been rational that half the orchestra commit suicide, given what they. Yeah, I'm sorry.
And so that's what I'm saying. The music. Okay, take the music away. You take the pulse, the blood, the civilization of the people.
Absolutely.
And like part of the thing about this is like being able to come back to the music. And what we're saying is coming back to the music, you come back to being able to express all the things that are like, you know, it's a really profound, for me, deep thing, because it's not even like the first time that I listened to John Coltrane, or even going back to the first time that I was hearing Sun Ra. But like the point is that this opening, this clarity, like it's invaluable to the
life-saving. Life-saving.
When I first
and
read,
this assault upon the life of the people. This is what we're talking about, and probably more profound than ever before. And we see it pronounced in young kids, young people. We can't get around this. And so I agree with you. And therefore, you do need a culture of the people, a culture of beauty, a culture of art. And this responsibility doesn't fall upon the poor, the child, the uneducated. It falls upon the intellectual, the artist, or presumed artist and musician.
In my opinion, I have all these friends doing all these amazing things, can teach me so much about different aspects of life. And it's like, you know, you would think that they would want to come. You think, and because, but the problem that also creates is a general lack of being clear, a general lack of being able to make art or more possibilities for, like you say, our children. And like, and what I mean is like, it's not impossible, because the music still is here, the knowledge still is here, like Du Bois is still here. And the only thing that makes it impossible is if you're afraid, and not courageous. And I don't see that at this table. And I don't stand for conversation, articulation, language that is not courageous or is afraid of the truth or the responsibility for seizing our future, to strive for freedom. No, there's no time for that, in my opinion.
and I just want to
I view this symposium as an intervention in this, especially in the imaginary, extending and broadening that Black revolutionary imaginary that must become part of all the American people. You know, when I think about, you know, we're listening to the sorrow songs, how you had people that were enslaved for hundreds of years and they never lost hope for that possibility of, I guess what Du Bois called the coming of the Lord, when it was possible for there to be a break with slavery, which went beyond simply reasoning. And I identify this, you know, imaginary as, in a certain sense, emerging partly from that, I guess Robeson's concept of being primitive, like even from Africa, where you didn't have quote unquote science, and so you had to like make myths about the rain god and the volcanoes and stuff to try to make sense of a world that you wanted to live in and dream of and bring it to reality. And this, I think, imaginary has been a driving force in revolutionary thought, in Black revolutionary thought, that has made it possible for someone to be a generative force and an agent of change in the most repressive white supremacist society that has yet to exist. And this doesn't take away like the necessity for knowledge. I think in fact complements it. But this ability to, I guess, go beyond pure reason and imagine a future and your place in generating this future. I think this can explain why so many young people, let's say, want to be rappers, want to be drug dealers, and other things that are destructive to themselves and to others. And this place and this imaginary in the revolutionary capacity of every human being also further is a pillar, I think, in a democratic struggle for freedom, and that every person can contribute to that world that does not yet exist, and that yet we must all believe in and stake our lives on.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I guess I'm going to make a joke, which is that Charles Mingus is known as the angry man of jazz?
That's right.
I think I'm beginning to be known as the angry woman of preschool.
I guess.
And the reason why I say that is, I think in our earlier conversation, part of what I was responding to is that, as the preschool navigating through Philadelphia, I think your point earlier is there's a lot of lack of awareness of this tradition.
Right.
But I think there's two pieces to it, which is we see a lot of lack of awareness, but also lack of responsibility for those who know this music and know this history, but aren't responsible. And then you also see a general category of individuals who don't want to be aware or responsible. That's what Serafina was referring to.
It's crazy.
And I think that's what makes it so sensitive or frustrating when I think for the rest, like the whole entirety of this room, the reason why we've had to dig and scramble, I mean, some more than others, especially the organizers, is that this music wasn't taught to us and this history wasn't taught to us. And yeah, many of us here are not musicians in the traditional sense that we play an instrument or we're geniuses in the instrument. But the thing that we're also doing is that we're starting, for example, for me, I don't know the saxophone, the trombone, the piano, so forth. But I think what stands out about these individuals is not their technical skill, not just their technical skill as musicians, but also as human beings and as revolutionaries. Because in our, like even Jeremiah was referring to Amiri Baraka's blues people. And in that conversation that we had as a group, there was this question of, okay, through music, something that's so concrete or something that actually is both concrete and abstract, you get to this question of what it means to be an American, meaning the slave from Africa coming to these shores, having to ask this question of, okay, at one point you transition from the plantation or from Africa to now the plantation and then to emancipation where you're now part of America. And you have to ask the question of what does it mean to be an American in this country? And I guess the reason why I point that out is because the frustration also comes, actually something Fatih you said earlier that really resonated with me is the totality of this, which is that it's not the musician just as a technical instrument, but actually the musician as a human being, as a revolutionary,
As an instrument.
the totality of that person. And it's getting to these questions. It's not just about the scale or on all the different terms. It's both that, but also the questions that they were dealing with. Mingus, in a society that is white supremacist, what was he dealing with? And I think that's also, it circles back to the question what you and I were talking about, which is that musicians today, whether you're a corporate musician or a musician of, I guess, the grassroots, the people, we don't see people who are showing the totality of a musician, both as instruments, but also as, or instruments of actually the rhythm and but also of society. And something that Mary also said that stuck out, which is that, which is the weight of the blues for the slaves, which is do musicians of this time know the weight of the music that they're playing? And I think I lost it. But I also appreciate what you said earlier, which is I didn't know that Mingus had the song, which is I think he's both angry but at the same time. Through his music, you see that he's a very loving man.
Yeah.
Let my children hear your music.
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate it.
And then that's what we're doing. And I think the one thing I wanted to add is I feel like part of what's at the heart of our conversation and even the kind of disagreement is you could say the question of artistic freedom or the artist and freedom. Because maybe, I don't know if this is exactly what you were saying, Tati, but part of maybe where there was tension is that you might say, or someone might say that, oh, like, in what free school is doing, are we imposing too strict of a criteria onto artists? And are we actually limiting the field of what artists should do or can do? I think this is sometimes like the impression that, or the conception that people have. But actually, what we've been talking about is that actually in today's society, are artists free to begin with? Like, I mean, this is like really what you raised, what Serafina's talking about, all of the people that we know, the young people that we know who want to be artists or become artists. Like, I call myself as one of those people. It's like, yeah, like, you're not operating within a free system. You're operating with a system which is basically designed, if you want to make it, you literally have to like funnel yourself into this like perversion of like a human being in order to basically get paid. Yeah, in order to like be successful. Like that's not freedom. And so what we're really talking about is the greater danger to the freedom of the artist, if we're even interested in that category, is literally that you've stripped the possibility of having like any human possibility presented to you. And it's like you're basically not given any, the term that we use is like you're not given a sky to strive for. And it's like that to me is a far greater threat to the freedom of the artist than like what we're talking about. And like literally what we're trying to do is to rip open, to create the possibility for people to try to see the sky and to strive for something. And you do that through the example of people like Charlie Mingus, like Duke Ellington, and like this, but I feel like this is like this whole thing where like people may be like, oh, you guys are imposing restrictions on artists. And actually, no, like the artist in today's society is not free. We're trying to free the artists. To try to pursue their cinema.
Oh yeah, I definitely did never see it that way. Like the rhetoric may sound that way, but see, what I see is people trying to just raise to raise the consciousness of the human being. Okay, just so happened the African Americans is part of this, but also I see with Tony, anybody who comes from a background of history of oppression, if you think you have anything damaged about you, come here and you can sort it out. Now, talking about Serafina, when during the pandemic, and I noticed all these people grew, and what I noticed with the preschool, it does have a platform for the artist, because see, I knew that she liked poetry, and I knew she had a talent with words. Then I found out today she knows how to play piano. But I wouldn't know that if I didn't come. So what did I do? Did I prejudge anyone? No, anyone here, you may get up and play a banjo. And then I said, and what it is, you adding, what you're doing to me is you're helping me know how to communicate with you. And I think what Serafina said, I did too. You meet musicians and wonder, well, why are they not interested in developing a philosophy of performance or of art? Why are they just interested? Why do they come off like they just want to entertain themselves? You know, and then make a few dollars to the side. I personally, I have a very high standard when it comes to morality in music, meaning that whatever music, first of all, don't come to me with any bad news. If you are a rapper, I say, now I want to know, do you really want to learn music? First of all, you have to be literate to the hit. If you're African American, to me, literate to the plight of the African in the Americas. It starts with the spiritual. Latin America starts with the rumba. Okay, be historically aware, and then technically get the technique. You can't get any technique. My argument with rap, what type of technique you want to get? You sing on one pitch, and you rattle along. Okay, maybe the verse form. Now, what I see, getting back to the idea of incorporating the musician or the artist into the preschool, how do you talk to a person without chasing them away? Or how do you bring to attention, like I can see wherever you go, you have a philosophical base. I don't care if where you go, you create a song or something. I can tell you think before you act. And I think I see the function of preschool with artists. We got a dancer, we got a bass player, and we talk. And I can feel them. I feel this preschool affecting them, and that they may not have the language to express all this, but I can feel that they understand. I have a language. I'm a linguist, anthropologist. I'm unique, and I'm not better. I'm just unusual because I'm able to express myself in the playing, and also I can talk about what I do. But I know a lot of musicians who can't do it. They want to.
Well, I just wanted to add to this conversation. Yes, felt like it. But I think that I was thinking about something that Crystal started with in the very beginning, saying that the white supremacist social system currently is a far more sophisticated system than it was maybe during the time of Duke Ellington or Charlie Mingus. And being so sophisticated, yes, you will not find somebody like Charles Mingus being lynched, but you will find Black people in neighborhoods being driven out of their homes, not having enough money to survive, not getting jobs, etc. So it's far more sophisticated in that it's not in your face, but it's subtle and it's deeper. And I feel like one day I think we were in the Lucien Blackwell library, and everybody, all the older Black folk there, was like, yeah, things are worse than it was when we were growing up. And you don't find the same thing being said by white people. White people are always like, oh, things were very good when I was growing up. Of course, it was great for you. But this dichotomy is making me think, like, I think that this creates more conditions of, like, maybe like this is the time where there are conditions to create more sophisticated music. Like, now that the oppression is more subtle, now that the oppression is more hidden, not in plain sight anymore. What is necessary now? And you can, like, the same way that Charles Mingus and Sun Ra had Ellington to look at, we also have Ellington. We also can sort of try and see where did he come from. And I think that this symposium goes a long way to try to get that into the minds and with the consciousness of the people today. And I wanted to actually address something that I've been thinking about this ever since Emily brought it up, this unconscious conditioning that we go through since we're children. And I grew up listening to music. I will not tell you what. It wasn't great, which I realize now, because it is music stripped from any kind of responsibility. It is music which is, the only purpose is to entertain. The only purpose is to say that, hey, you have something soothing in your ear, which you can talk about to your friends and pretend how cool you are, and I grew up with the Beatles. And then I remember this one time when Doc told me, "You ever heard of Little Richie?" Exactly in that way. But and I hadn't, and I looked him up, and it turns out that the Beatles opened for Little Richie in 1962 before they made it big. They started getting famous around 1964. And in 1962, they opened for Little Richie, and you can actually Little Richard, yes. And I felt when you listen to the Beatles, all I can hear is Little Richard. And I do feel like somehow my own consciousness has been affected by the kind of music that I've listened to growing up. Because I think I was telling this to Kathy yesterday. When I listen to Charles Mingus, I've never listened to his music before. Now I'm listening to it a lot. And when I listen to Charles Mingus, first of all, his angry persona doesn't come through in his music, right? it's full of love, and it's so soulful, and I when I listen to his music, I feel like, oh my God, I feel like I'm in Paris and looking up at this open skies or something. Now, I've never been to Paris, but why does my mind associate this music with the European view of the world? I mean, what does it mean that this music that is making me think of Europe, which I've never visited, comes from America, from a black man, you know? And that's how I've been trying to think about how my mind has also like listened to music growing up, like British music and, you know, classical music, and how my brain has sort of, you know, yeah, almost restructured like modernity around a European centric vision, right? And I feel like nowadays when I wake up, I try to listen to Duke Ellington a little bit, right? And again, not very familiar with his music, but in my listening to him, and also looking at paintings around the same time, around the Harlem Renaissance, like Aaron Douglas and Jacob Lawrence, I often wonder, why was this called the Harlem Renaissance and not the Second Renaissance? Almost. Because, you know, there's a kind of universality in all of that art that was produced during that period. It kind of, I feel like art that came out of the Harlem Renaissance, especially the music, is very unifying. You know, it unified. It unified so much that all the white artists copied that music for decades. You know, so why would you not call it a worldwide movement of thought? You know? And yeah, I mean, I just feel like the music for Black people has been, as I understand it, everything. You know, like when you ask white artists, okay, why do you play music, or what does your music mean? They'll be like, oh, it's a form of expression, or it's a form of protest, or it's a form of something. But for Black people, it was everything. It was everything all at once. And I think I was very, like, we read Souls of Black Folk recently, and there was this one part when we were reading where Du Bois talks about, and I was very emotional when I was reading this, where Du Bois talks about how after Reconstruction, these people went to the Black folk and said that, well, you're free, but we won't give you any land. And they started to sway and sing. You know, that's how they responded, not with violence, not with crying or a heavy display of emotion. They sang, and that was the way that they established their protest. That was the way they expressed themselves. That was the way they prophesied what is to come for themselves and for this and for the country. And yeah, I really feel like this was like music is knowledge, you know, that has been passed down through a kind of oral tradition through generations. And it is, and now, you know, we are also trying to disperse that knowledge.
Well,
it's part of.
Oh, I was gonna ask really quick if we wanted to do a fundraising update, or at least I could share just like outreach, outreach. I mean, I was going to give more specific, concrete ideas for what we would do for passing out, but flyers are already out on the table. If they want to take a couple. But actually, I'm curious if you want to do like the.
Yeah, I also wanted, it's like past 2 so I also wanted to know if you wanted to try that soon, but we have a GoFundMe for this event, and Yeah, it just went live like yesterday night. We're trying to raise $2,000. And yeah, the link is on the Free School website. And I'm also in the process of adding it to like our social media as well, so that if you would like to make a contribution, we would really appreciate it to just cover the cost of the venue, and also future operations of the free school. So yeah.
Yeah, we'll post the link in the live stream comments as well.
Okay. But yeah, I just wanted to like say one more thing to the conversation though, and it is to bring it to like a point that I feel like Purba, you had raised, where like that the movement itself was incomplete music. And I would even say like and we're also seeing the other way around, that the music is incomplete without the movement, or that the musicians are incomplete without the movement. And I think that's what like this event is trying to like give, and also open up and to give to artists and to musicians, is to give them the ability to ground themselves in the movement, so that their music, so they can actually be artists. And yeah, I think like to talk about like the imitation and the minstrelsy that we see today, which Doc, you were mentioning, like jazz musicians today are possibly like a new form of minstrelsy, actually, like are actually taking up a new form of minstrelsy for white audiences. And so I think it is important to like establish the criteria that anything that doesn't stand up for Black people is imitation and minstrelsy of this music and this musical tradition. Like Charles Mingus has this song called like F This Nazi USA. Like if you listen to it, like if you were to imagine like a hip hop song like of that, you can imagine a hip hop song of that same title, but it's obviously, it doesn't sound anything like hip hop. So it kind of just shows you like you can protest, you can have music that's angry and that is representative of the conditions, of the pain and the suffering of this time, and not have it sound like hip hop. Like you can. And I think Mingus like has that element and more, and so much more. And that's what we're trying to give, the totality of the music.
Do we want to do comments? I don't think we really need to do comments. There's like one comment by Megna I had wanted to read, but I don't even know. Oh, okay. The Black musical and religious imaginary of science for love and liberation is the opposite of the white dystopian mindset. Faith in the future means we have a duty to never stop striving. I think other than that, people are dropping a lot of the musical facts and opinions and different references in the chat. So that's
Very good.
great.